Chapter 108. But when she changed the topic, she hesitated. Gong Che saw this and knew that something must have happened, so he let her speak. Empress Lu gritted her teeth and said angrily, Long Xiang, that bitch, actually sent someone to report that Che is not in good health, and the canal can't be delayed. She wants someone else to take charge and build the canal. She said coldly, that's a good idea. Now that the main road has been built, it's just the work of repairing the dam and digging the tributaries. 2 years is enough. She wanted to secretly recommend her son, but because of Lu Xianfei's interference yesterday, it didn't happen. These were all her son's efforts. Those people saw that there was profit to be made and came to snatch it. Not only did they cause her son to lie in bed, but they also wanted to replace him. How shameless. It's a pity that Lu family is weak, and she just came out of the sacred Buddha temple. Otherwise, she wouldn't be so passive. But strangely, after hearing the Empress's angry words, Gong Che's expression didn't change at all, as if he didn't care. The Empress thought that Gong Che was angry and worried that something bad would happen. She quickly suppressed her anger and comforted him. Don't worry, my son. Mother won't let them succeed like this. Now that His Majesty has recognized you as the Crown Prince in a short time, they can't suppress you. However, what Gong Che wanted was not only to suppress. This time, when he was critically ill, it was as if something awakened in his body. If he only wanted to do good for the country and the people before, he wanted to protect the people around him and not let them down. But now, he has a clearer goal. Gong Che put down the bowl. After drinking a bowl of medicine, his spirit was obviously better. But because he was scarily thin and his face was pale, it was very scary. He got up and looked like he wanted to get out of bed. Che, what are you doing? The Empress was very strange, but she quickly went to help him. Mother, I want to go to Zhaoyang Hall. Empress Lu was shocked. Why are you going to Zhaoyang Hall like this? Gong Che smiled faintly, but not as gentle as before. His smile was cold and gloomy. Since it's mine, no one else is qualified to snatch it. He looked out of the hall and muttered softly. If it's mine, I'll take it back. Gong Cheng was not in good spirits during this period of time. He was anxious, and almost everyone was in danger. At this moment, Changshi stepped forward and whispered, Your Majesty, the Crown Prince is here. Gong Cheng's hand, which was practicing calligraphy, paused. Didn't he just wake up? What are you doing here? Let him go back and recuperate. Changshi was a little embarrassed. But the Crown Prince knelt outside the hall and said that if Your Majesty doesn't see him, he won't get up. Gong Cheng frowned and threw the brush on the table. He was so angry that he laughed. Good, this one by one. I want to see what he wants to do. After that, he strode out, and Changshi hurriedly followed. The weather was rather gloomy, as if a heavy rain was brewing. The skinny Gong Che knelt on the bluestone slab, his entire body stiff and straight. Initially, Gong Cheng had a belly full of anger because of his depression, but the moment he saw Gong Che, most of his anger dissipated. He couldn't help but think of that child. That child used his life to save his child. As a father, what qualifications did he have to give this child a hard time? Moreover, Gong Che's current appearance was indeed frightening. There was no trace of his previous handsomeness. Gong Cheng knew the reason for Gong Che's illness this time was because of that child's death. It was just that he didn't salvage the child's body, so he stubbornly believed that Gong Yimo wasn't dead. But Gong Che was different. He became like this in just a few days. It was clear that he believed it and was extremely sorrowful. Gong Cheng couldn't help but sigh in his heart. They weren't siblings, but they were more like siblings. What are you doing here? His tone was faint, revealing his exhaustion. Gong Che looked at the high and mighty emperor. His eyes flashed with a light that only he understood. He kowtowed deeply and said, I beg Imperial Father to dismiss this son from the position of the Eastern Palace. His words were like a clap of thunder that stunned Gong Cheng. He frowned and waved everyone present to withdraw. He looked at the Crown Prince solemnly. Why? Do you know that you can stay here alive? It's her. Gong Cheng wanted to say that she exchanged her life for it. That's exactly why. Gong Che suddenly raised his head. His eyes were red and filled with tears as he looked straight at the emperor. That's exactly why. The position of crown prince was stained with imperial sister's blood. It's fine if you don't want it. His words made Gong Cheng's heart ache. He had always refused to admit that Gong Yimo was dead. After all, there was no corpse. But some people said that perhaps the power of the poison was so great that her body had long been shattered and filled with the billowing dragon river. Gong Cheng blinked for a long time before saying, "If you do this, her spirit in heaven will not rest in peace." It doesn't matter. When Gong Che said this, his heart was already dead. He smiled with a pale face. Whether I'm the crown prince or not, Imperial Sister will not come back to life. But I have something to ask Imperial Father. Gong Cheng sighed. Say it. Gong Che's face showed a trace of longing. The Grand Canal was Imperial Sister's idea. She was also the one who facilitated, planned, and built it. I hope Imperial Father can send me to continue the construction of the canal. Imperial Sister's greatest wish was to push the tributary to the interior of Dayu State, so that it could cross the east and west, strengthen trade, and benefit the people. Now she's dead. The last word was almost inaudible. That slightly trembling ending sound made Gong Cheng's heart sour, and he closed his eyes. Gong Che forced himself to stay awake and said calmly and firmly, "Now that she's dead, I will fulfill her wish for her." Gong Che bowed again and pleaded, "I beg Imperial Father to allow it." The Emperor stood there for a long time before he slowly opened his eyes. "Your body. I'm afraid it won't allow. It's not a problem." Gong Che directly raised his head and interrupted the Emperor's words. His eyes were full of hope, as if they were bursting with infinite vitality. "No one knows better than me how she wants to build the next main road. No one knows better than me her intentions. She said that once the Grand Canal was completed, she wanted to secretly name it. She asked me to seek Imperial Father's approval. Now that she's gone, I will inherit the wish and name she left behind." Gong Cheng couldn't help but ask, what name did she want to name it? Gong Che paused after each word. "Zetian Grand Canal. Bless the people. The world is one family." "Good." Gong Cheng suddenly clapped his hands and looked deeply at Gong Che. "Good name. This will be the name. Zetian, Zetian, what a good meaning." He smiled and waved his hand tiredly. "I understand what you mean. Zhen will continue to send you to build the canal, but there's no need to say more about the position of Crown Prince. You deserve it. I hope you take good care of yourself and return as soon as possible." Gong Che was overjoyed, but his face was rather bleak as he kowtowed. "This son, thanks your majesty for your kindness." When Gong Che returned to the Eastern Palace, Empress Lu was pacing back and forth, muttering to herself. When she saw Gong Che, her eyes lit up. "Che, what are you going to do? Your Imperial Father." Gong Che waved his hand, indicating for her to be at ease. "Imperial Father has given his permission. I will be fully responsible for supervising the construction of the Grand Canal." The Empress was overjoyed. Really? She only met the Emperor once. How could it have such a big effect? Gong Che smiled gently. Really? But for some reason, when she saw Gong Che's familiar smile, the Empress felt a trace of unfamiliarity. Her son seemed to have changed. At this time, Gong Che took the porridge from the palace servant and smiled as he ate. Because he was now too thin, his smile was a bit scary. Emo or Wendishizhou, but he couldn't go with her. He had enough of this feeling of being controlled by others. He wanted to be strong enough to do whatever he wanted. He swore that when Gong Yimo came back, he would be different. Chapter 109. The Barren Miasma Plains. Gong Dai saw Lu Ye's troops patrolling in the distance. He hid behind a huge rock and tore off a piece of meat with an expressionless face and put it into his mouth. He used the corpses of a dozen people as bait to hunt down a lone wolf. Wolf meat was really disgusting, but he couldn't seem to smell any fishy smell as he chewed. During this time, he saw many corpses. Some were from Dayu State, and some were from Lu Yi. It seemed like everyone was looking for him. However, if the Dayu State people wanted to come here, they had to break through Lu Ye's encirclement. Therefore, there were probably only a few Dayu State people who came here alive. Gong Dai looked at the sky. It seemed like it was going to snow again. Every time it snowed, The miasma in the barren miasma plains would recede. That was when Lu Ye's men came in to search for him. The reason why Gong Dai wasn't affected by the miasma was that when he first came in, he was hallucinating because of the miasma. When he suddenly woke up, he found himself in a strange yellow flower bush. The yellow flower was the antidote. This was originally an advantage, but recently, it snowed more and more frequently. Without food, his situation became more and more dangerous. Another 7 days passed. Snowflakes fluttered in the sky. Gong Dai once again hid at the border of the barren miasma plains. He saw a group of people sitting anxiously in front of a bonfire not far away. The atmosphere was particularly depressing. How long does the general want us to wait? It's just one person, and he wants us to surround him. If you ask me, that kid would have died in there long ago. There's no point in waiting like this. Another older man with a big beard comforted him. That kid could play around with more than 10,000 soldiers, kill the general, and burn the provisions. How could he die so easily? Don't let your guard down. If we make any more mistakes, we will all be killed by the general. That kid has the general's token. It's a disgrace if it falls into the hands of an outsider. We have to get it back. I wonder if the people who went in to search have found that kid. And the tokens they were talking about were actually tokens carved on bones. Every person of status had one, and usually hung it around their neck. And Gong Dai could use the 3 tokens in his hand to claim credit from the emperor. This was irrefutable proof. Gong Dai silently looked at this group of people. His body seemed to have merged with the snow and the night, not moving at all. He had been observing for a few days. Other than them, there were 2 more checkpoints that they had to pass as they went further out. Therefore, it was unwise to alert the enemy now. But it was as if the heavens were helping him. Just as he was thinking that it would be great if someone could divert their attention, the sound of close combat could be heard from afar. Someone shouted from afar, "Catch her! Don't let her in!" When the people around the bonfire heard the noise, they immediately rushed over. Gong Dai narrowed his eyes and looked at the group of people in front of him rushing towards that place. He thought to himself, perhaps they are people from Dayu State again. Or perhaps this is a good opportunity to escape. There were only 2 guards behind him. Perhaps he could escape first and then blend in with the enemy? His figure approached like a fog. The darkness of the night was the best concealment. More and more people were running in that direction. Gong Dai smiled and quickly moved in the opposite direction. Before anyone discovered him, he had to leave this damned place and act according to the circumstances. As for the life and death of the person who came to save him, since she came to save him, wasn't she worthy of dying for him? But before he could leave, he was stopped in his tracks by a loud laugh. Gong Yimo retreated and laughed at the people behind her. "You guys are too slow. How are you going to catch me like this?" Gong Dai's eyes stared into the dark night. The voice just now. Perhaps it was too much of a dream, but when it suddenly appeared, he was actually not sure. Gong Yimo ran deeper into the desolate miasma plains while thinking. Once she entered the depths of the desolate miasma plains, these people would definitely not dare to chase after her. The deeper she went, the more dangerous it would be. Who knew when the snow would stop? Once she was hit by the miasma, she would die. But she was not afraid. She still had a simple gas mask in her space. Therefore, she ran as fast as she could without any regard for her life, while provoking them mischievously. The reason why she could rush in so easily was because she used her naked body to attract their attention. Now, the bigger the commotion, the easier it would be for Gong Dai to notice her and discover her. As for fighting with them, who knew that Gong Yimo's internal injuries had not healed yet? Wouldn't fighting be asking for trouble? By the time she ran out of energy, she was already in the depths of the desolate miasma plains. Everywhere was pitch black. She turned around and saw that the people behind her were finally not chasing after her. She could not help but make a face at them proudly. But when she turned around, she fell into someone's arms, giving her a fright. She wanted to struggle, but that pair of hands was like an iron wall that held her tightly. The other party's head was deeply buried in her neck. His hot breath hit her neck. Before Gong Yimo could react, the other party's 2 words suppressed all her movements. "Royal sister." Gong Yimo was stunned. At this moment, the snow was dancing and the world was silent. She could only hear the other party's rapid breathing. "Is it Gong Dai?" Gong Yimo asked carefully. In the darkness, she could not see clearly who was hugging her. Moreover, Gong Dai seemed to have passed the age of puberty. Now his voice sounded cold but lingering. It was as if thousands of words were contained in those two words. She did not get an answer because Gong Dai hugged her even tighter. That strong and powerful heartbeat. It fiercely hit her ear again and again. It really was Gong Dai. Gong Yimo quickly hugged him back. He had grown so tall. Gong Yimo couldn't help but take a deep breath. Great. She found him as soon as she arrived, and he looked fine. Nothing had happened to him at all. He really deserved to be the child she raised. At this moment, Gong Dai felt like he was dreaming. For so many days and nights, whether it was acting in front of others, carefully plotting and scheming, taking risks to spy on Lu Yi at night, or using tricks to burn the supplies, he was chased by the army several times. There were several times when he almost died. He could drink muddy water, eat bloody meat, and hold tightly onto the nameplates of the guards he had killed. All of this was so that he could go back and see her. It was so that he could have power, so that he could be at the top. It was so that he could never leave her side. And the person he thought about day and night, the person he could not sleep at night, was right in front of him. How he wanted to kiss her to fill his heart with the pain of yearning. He couldn't imagine how he had endured the past 500 days and nights without her. But it did not matter. She was in his arms, so real. The sweet fragrance on her body was exactly the same as the one he had smelled when he hugged her to sleep. However, his royal sister had grown up. She attracted him even more. After hugging for a while, even Gong Dai himself felt a little embarrassed. However, the person in his arms did not resist at all. He looked at her in surprise. Under the faint moonlight, Gong Yimo's little face was right in front of him. She was sleeping so soundly. Chapter 110. She was really tired. She had used Qing Gong and galloped the entire way. She almost did not sleep at all. She was afraid that if she slept, she would wake up to the news of Gong Dai's death. Even if she believed in Gong Dai, she was still afraid and could not sleep at all. Now that she saw Gong Dai and hugged him, Gong Yimo could no longer resist the sleepiness and fell asleep. The surroundings were quiet. Only the two of them were hugging each other in the endless snowy plains. Gong Dai's heart skipped a beat. He could not help but lower his head and gently kiss her forehead. He did not forget how dirty he was now. Fortunately, there was no smell otherwise. He would be too ashamed to show his face. They could not stay in the plains at night for long. He was afraid that there would be ferocious beasts. He hurriedly carried Gong Yimo and walked to a place. Fortunately, he found the yellow flowers that could restrain the miasma. If they rested in a place with these flowers, they would not be affected by the miasma. Therefore, Gong Dai hurriedly took Gong Yimo and left this place. After walking for about 2 hours, he came to a pile of rocks. The yellow flowers grew in the cracks of the rocks. In the depths of the pile of rocks, there was a small cave. It was really small, only 2 meters high and 2 meters deep. It could not block the wind, but it could only shelter from the rain. This was a place he found by chance and rested. Gong Dai first carefully put her in, then used his fastest speed to pull some withered grass and spread it on the ground. Because it was snowing, although he shook off the snow, the grass was still moist and bone-chilling. How could Gong Yimo sleep? Gong Dai, who had never been troubled by any problems, looked at the pile of grass in front of him and hesitated. He always wanted to give Gong Yimo the best, no matter the environment. After thinking, he took off his coat and spread it on the grass pile. Then, he carried Gong Yimo up. Sleeping on the grass was better than sleeping on the ground. Gong Yimo lazily moved, but she didn't open her eyes. Gong Dai couldn't help but smile. He rarely smiled, but when he did, it was very beautiful. It was as if the ice and snow had just melted, causing others to be alarmed. After doing this, he made another fire and went out to clean himself up with snow. He did it very slowly and meticulously. His movements were elegant and unhurried. He couldn't leave a bad impression in front of Gong Yimo. He wanted her to see the good in him. After cleaning up, when he came back, His body was already cold. He expelled the cold from his body by the bonfire, but his eyes could not help but stare at Gong Yimo. It really felt like a dream. Was he really not dreaming? A hint of confusion flashed through Gong Dai's eyes. Under the flickering light of the fire, Gong Yimo's little face was also bright red. She slept very soundly and peacefully. She didn't have to worry about anything by Gong Dai's side. He was someone she could completely entrust her back to. Gong Yimo smacked her lips in her sleep, then pouted and went back to sleep. Seeing this, Gong Dai couldn't help but laugh. He felt a wave of relief. How long had it been since he could quietly look at her like this? It had been so long that it felt like a lifetime ago. Gong Dai got up and slowly approached her. His body was still warm from the fire. He quietly slept next to Gong Yimo and looked at her up close. Gong Yimo was actually very beautiful, but her facial expressions were too rich. They changed like the wind at any time, making it difficult for people to quietly admire her appearance. Only when she didn't speak or move, that perfect and natural face would show its elegance, especially when she didn't smile and quietly looked at you. Just her pair of clear eyes that could contain everything was enough to make people fall in love with her. But when she closed her eyes, her entire face appeared quiet and gentle. However, when she slept, she would always frown slightly, as if there was an unresolvable sadness in her eyes. Gong Dai gently touched her forehead with his finger. This face had been depicted thousands of times in his heart. Her eyelashes had grown longer, her face had become whiter and more delicate, and her facial features had also gradually matured. There would be a day when no one would overlook her appearance no matter how witty she was. Because his royal sister had already become a beauty capable of causing the downfall of a city, Gong Dai was very glad that he didn't miss out on her today. Royal sister was here to save him. She rushed over from thousands of miles away. How could he miss out on her? It seemed like he was still number one in her heart. The next day, when Gong Yimo woke up, she found herself being hugged tightly. She tilted her head and saw Gong Dai, letting out a long sigh of relief. Thank goodness, thank goodness. She thought she was dreaming last night. Gong Dai was really fine, and he was alive and well by her side. Also, Gong Dai had changed. He was almost 13 years old. In fact, Gong Yimo was only 7 months older than Gong Dai, but the childishness in him seemed to have disappeared. His eyes were becoming more and more exquisite, and his appearance was becoming more and more devilish. He was also becoming more and more like the Prince Regent in the future. But no matter how much he changed, he was still the child that she raised. Gong Yimo was very satisfied. Under Gong Yimo's naked gaze, Gong Dai could no longer pretend to be asleep. He opened his eyes. Those eyes that were cold and emotionless in the eyes of his subordinates were so clean and cold in front of Gong Yimo. They were like sparkling snowflakes on a snowy mountain. Gong Yimo liked his eyes very much. They were pure black and white, just like black jade. That pair of eyes suddenly became helpless. Royal sister, Gong Yimo answered him verbally, but her little hand was happily pinching Gong Dai's face. She laughed and said, "Did you not eat properly? Look at how skinny you are. There's no meat left." But in her heart, she was praising him. It felt so good to the touch. Even the wind and sand in Shi province couldn't make his skin rough. Gong Dai helplessly held her hand and took it down. He looked at her intently and smiled. "Why is royal sister here?" Gong Yimo laughed heartlessly. "To save you, of course." Her thinking made Gong Dai feel rather helpless. "Royal sister, I'm not a child anymore." Didn't she see that his hand was already big enough to completely wrap around Gong Yimo's hand? Gong Yimo laughed. "In my eyes, you'll always be a child." She could finally say such things to someone with a loving face. What a sense of accomplishment. Gong Dai laughed with her, but he squeezed her hand tightly and sighed in a very, very low voice. "You'll know that I've grown up." Gong Yimo was confused by his words. Then she realized that the two of them were still hugging each other. This didn't seem right. Gong Yimo wanted to get up, but Gong Dai pressed her down and said coquettishly, "It's cold outside, and how long has it been since we last met? Let's talk." Gong Yimo helplessly shook her head and continued to lie down. But now she felt strange. Her back was against the wall, while Gong Ju was hugging her and squeezing her very close to the wall. There was a faint smell of snow on him, and it was very cold, but his breath was scorching hot, and the small space suddenly became hot. Chapter 111. Why are you leaning so close to me? Gong Yimo asked seriously. Gong Dai rested his head gently on her neck and said softly, "Because I'm cold, royal sister." Gong Yimo was speechless. She tilted her head and saw that it was indeed snowing outside. There was even a cold wind blowing. This time, she was speechless. However, her body could not help but tense up. She did not know why, but she felt that Gong Dai was a little strange this time. However, she quickly thought that perhaps it was because they had not seen each other for too long that he was so clingy. At this moment, Gong Dai was feeling both sweet and painful. The sweet thing was that he could get close to Gong Yimo without any fear. He could hug her to sleep and smell the sweet scent of sugar on her body. Unfortunately, he could only get these as a child. However, he was no longer a child. In the past year, he had often mingled with the soldiers and listened to them reminiscing about their wives at home. Then, they would talk about some dirty jokes. In his heart, there would be uncontrollable fantasies. Moreover, the person that he had been thinking about day and night was in his arms. Gong Dai's hands tightened little by little. He could not help but rub against Gong Yimo's body. He did not know what he wanted, but rubbing against her like this made him feel strangely comfortable. However, he was also alert at all times. He tried his best to act coquettishly. He knew that Gong Yimo loved it when he acted coquettishly or made cute expressions. She would not doubt him at all and would even be satisfied. But why was it not enough for him to hug her? Did he want more? Gong Dai's body was tense as he restrained himself. He tried his best to ask in a calm tone, "Will royal sister still leave?" He was just asking casually. No matter what, he would keep her by his side when she came. However, Gong Yimo simply stroked his long hair and smiled. "I'm not leaving. You don't have to dig the canal anymore. Let's build the canal together." Gong Dai looked up happily. "Are you serious?" He could not help but smile. His face had become more and more exquisite, and this smile was simply too beautiful. Gong Yimo covered her little heart. "Good girl. It's better if you smile less in the future. Your smile is going to steal people's souls." It would be great if she could really seduce him. Although he knew that she was joking, Gong Dai was still elated when he heard her words. He smiled faintly. His snow-white inner robe set off his jade-like face. He was so close that it seemed as if he could really steal her soul. Gong Yimo was stunned for a moment before she said, "I'm really not leaving this time. Beijing is not fun at all. Now, there are so many open and covert struggles. Let's just hide here and go back later when you grow up. You can get married. I want to marry the best girl in Dayu State for you." "The best in Dayu State? Isn't that you?" Gong Dai looked at her and smiled. No, his royal sister was the best in the world. It's great that she's not leaving. They'll stay here, and no one will come and snatch her away. He had enough time to move his royal sister. One day, even his royal sister would accept him. Then, they would never go back. As long as she was with him, Gong Dai did not care if he was a prince or a commoner. As long as he had her, they could go sightseeing in the day and have sex at night. That was his greatest ambition in life. Gong Yimo naturally did not notice his little scheme. After they talked about who she belonged to, she had to think about how to get out of here. After all, Jinshi of Gojoseon had sent many people to search for her. As long as they did not show up, many people would die. Gong Yimo's idea was actually very simple. She would attract the enemy's attention while Gong Dai would leave first. Then, he would find someone to save her. However, this idea was strongly opposed by Gong Dai. She could only give up and think of another way. Actually, it was not easy for them to leave. The desolate miasma plain was so big, and it was getting colder. Lu Yi must have withdrawn a lot of his troops. It was impossible for him to block every exit. Moreover, there were only 2 of them. They were a small target and would not be a big problem. After thinking it through, Gong Yimo sat up and crawled to the fire. There was a piece of meat roasting over the fire. It did not smell good, but it was cleaned very well. Seeing Gong Yimo staring at it, Gong Dai came over and and took the meat. He said awkwardly, "There's no other food here, only wolf meat. Royal sister, please bear with it. You've been eating this all this time?" Gong Yimo frowned slightly. She could not help but feel sorry for him. When she raised him, even when he was in the cold palace, he was served with delicious fish and meat. Although his food was not exquisite, it was definitely not bad. However, she did not expect him to stay here for more than 10 days. Not to mention the danger. He could only eat this kind of food. Gong Dai would definitely not tell her that at the beginning. He ate grass roots and drank mud and snow water. His royal sister was good at everything, but she liked to make him look weak. It was as if he was always a child who needed her protection. Gong Yimo was very conflicted. She had a lot of food in her space, but she did not bring a package when she came here. How could she explain it to him? She frowned and dug in her clothes with one hand. Finally, she took out a meat patty. This meat patty was bought on the way here. It was the right size. She should not be suspected. Gong Dai was secretly amused. Ever since he was a child, Gong Ju didn't know how many inappropriate things his sister had taken out. She seemed to have a very magical object that contained many useful things. It was just that outsiders couldn't see them. Gong Ju even thought that the reason why Gong Yimo knew so many things was because she learned them from books that he couldn't understand. It was a pity that she had never told him about this, so he could not figure out what it was. Seeing Gong Yimo pass the meat patty to him, Gong Dai forced a smile. "I'll eat the wolf meat. Royal sister should eat this." As he said this, he really stuffed the wolf meat into his mouth in front of Gong Yimo. The unpleasant taste made Gong Yimo frown. The wolves in this wasteland grew up eating human meat. If they were not forced to, who would be willing to eat it? She frowned and felt around in her clothes. Then, she took out a chicken drumstick. It seemed difficult to explain, but Gong Dai had never asked since they were young. Gong Dai narrowed his eyes slightly and said in a strange tone, "I hugged Royal Sister for a night, but I didn't know that Royal Sister was hiding something." Gong Yimo lowered her head awkwardly. It was not that she did not want to say it, but how could she explain this thing if she really said it? Gong Dai felt an inexplicable chill in his heart. He took a bite of the wolf meat and did not take the chicken drumstick that Gong Yimo passed to him. "I don't know how long it will take to get out of here. Royal Sister should keep it." After he finished speaking, Gong Ju lowered his eyelids. Gong Yimo didn't trust him. This knowledge made Gong Ju feel wronged and sad. His heart was filled with hostility. He was trying his best to control himself and not let himself lose his composure. Chapter 112. However, the bitterness under that anger made Gong Dai feel very uncomfortable. As long as she said it, no matter what she said, he would keep it a secret. He would believe it. But why didn't Gong Yimo say anything until now? Seeing him biting the meat in a fit of anger, Gong Yimo wasn't sure if he had discovered something. She gritted her teeth, put the meat patty aside, and tore a piece of wolf meat to chew on. "Royal Sister." He grabbed Gong Yimo's hand that was about to put it into his mouth. His expression was pained and helpless as he sighed. "You can't eat it." Gong Yimo looked up with a smile when her hand was grabbed. "Didn't you say you were going to stay for a long time? Why can you eat it, but I can't?" Gong Dai bit his lower lip. If he had a choice, why would he let Gong Yimo eat this kind of wild beast that grew up eating human flesh? If she didn't say anything, then so be it. As long as she didn't torture him, he could continue to pretend to be deaf and mute. With that thought, he grabbed Gong Yimo's hand and pulled it towards himself bit by bit. His movements were slow, but the strength he used to grab her hand was very firm. Gong Yimo couldn't resist. In the end, he lowered his head and took the piece of wolf meat into his mouth. His black hair cascaded down, setting off his exquisite appearance. When his light pink lips touched Gong Yimo's fingertips, it made Gong Yimo's heart ache. After watching him swallow the old and fishy meat, he looked up at her and smiled. "My royal sister deserves the best, regardless of the circumstances." The young man's deep voice was ear-piercing. Gong Yimo didn't expect that an unintentional action back then would allow him to retain his perfect voice. She was really lucky. She gritted her teeth and finally made a decision. She threw the meat in Gong Dai's hand onto the ground. She didn't know who she was angry at, but she stomped on it twice and stuffed the drumstick into his hand. Eat. Gong Dai was stunned for a moment. Then he said helplessly, "No need. I'm afraid there's not enough food." Enough? Gong Yimo interrupted him. Under his trusting eyes, Gong Yimo did not dare to look at him. She lowered her head and took out a lot of things. Even though he had guessed it in his heart, when he saw this scene, Gong Dai was still shocked. This scene could only be seen in novels. Her royal sister was already extraordinary enough, but this move was beyond the scope of a human. Seeing that Gong Dai didn't say anything, Gong Yimo felt a little uneasy. Was she being too impulsive? This was definitely terrifying for ordinary people, right? She regretted it. She shouldn't have exposed it. This was her final trump card. She smiled awkwardly and explained with an uneasy expression. Actually, it's nothing. It's just that it can store things, and the things it can store are limited. It can't store living things. She originally only wanted to tell Gong Dai that this space was of little value, but she didn't expect to reveal the biggest weakness of this space. Gong Dai's heart suddenly relaxed. This was good. If Gong Yimo disappeared one day, he would definitely go crazy. Even so, his emotions were still very fluctuating. People were always uneasy about the unknown. Gong Yimo was so special, and she had such a godlike unknown power. Could she really be a god and not an ordinary person? Would she disappear one day? This thought made Gong Dai's heart tremble. He suddenly regretted forcing Gong Yimo to reveal this secret. Would she leave once the secret was revealed? Just like when she first appeared, Gong Ju inexplicably tightened his grip on Gong Yimo's hand. Seeing the eagerness in his eyes, Gong Yimo scratched her head in confusion. Royal sister, I won't tell anyone. Gong Yimo's heart relaxed. As long as you're not afraid. Royal sister, will you leave me? Gong Yimo was stunned. She didn't understand why he would say that. No matter what, you can't leave me. You can't. Before Gong Yimo could answer, she was forcefully interrupted by Gong Dai. Looking at his nervous and slightly flustered expression, Gong Yimo laughed. She worried for nothing. This was a child she raised. What problem could there be? This is my home. How can I leave? As she spoke, she picked through the pile of things on the ground. Then, her eyes lit up. There's wine. There's actually so much left. You're in luck. We haven't seen each other for so long. Let's drink some wine and chat. Don't be so nervous. Relax. Gong Dai was convinced. He was originally flustered, but when he heard Gong Yimo's words, he strangely calmed down. Sometimes, he really couldn't understand Royal Sister's thoughts. He was clearly so nervous and panicked, but she completely couldn't accept this relationship. She could even ask him to drink. Gong Dai sighed helplessly. It seemed like this was the first time they drank wine, but he was feeling very complicated. Why did it seem like such a big matter was not worth mentioning when it came to Royal Sister? Gong Yimo felt that a child past the age of 12 was considered a teenager and could drink. So, she gave Gong Dai a small wine bag, thinking that he couldn't drink much. Little did she know that the teenager had once killed someone with strong alcohol. Take it. Don't think too much. It's already afternoon, and it's snowing heavily. Let's rest during the day, and get ready to move at night. Gong Yimo didn't want to talk too much about the dimensional space, so she just kept drinking. At this time, they were sitting in the cave with a bonfire in front of them. Looking up, they could see the falling snow. If it weren't for the fact that they were being chased, Gong Yimo wouldn't be in a hurry to leave with food and drink. Seeing that she didn't mind, Gong Dai let go and really started chatting with her. They talked about everything from the capital to Shizhou, from wells to canals. In the end, Gong Yimo was a little drunk. She looked up at the gray sky and the falling snow outside and couldn't help but sigh. The snow in Shizhou was very beautiful. Because the cave wasn't deep, sitting in front of the bonfire, snowflakes would occasionally be blown in by the wind. Gong Yimo thought that if there were a few scholars here, she would probably have to compose a poem. Just like this, they watched the falling snow while drinking. They talked less and less, and in the end, they were just drinking. A jar of good wine went into Gong Yimo's stomach. Gong Dai took the wine bag that Gong Yimo gave him and tasted it bit by bit. He almost didn't drink much. Call me when it's night time. After Gong Yimo finished speaking, she passed out in a daze. Her internal injuries hadn't recovered and sleeping was the best way to heal them. Gong Dai carried her back and went out to find a lot of dead branches and grass. Although people like them who practiced martial arts had internal energy to protect their bodies, Gong Dai could feel that Gong Yimo was weak and was afraid that she would catch a cold again. After doing all this, he gently lay down beside Gong Yimo and sighed in satisfaction. If only there were only him and Royal Sister in the world then, he wouldn't have to restrain himself like this. Chapter 113. It was still snowing and the bonfire was burning brightly, making the small space very warm. Gong Dai realized that as long as Gong Yimo was by his side, he didn't seem to want to think about anything. His entire mind was filled with only her. Gong Yimo had drunk some wine and was in a deep sleep. Her long eyelashes fluttered as if she was dreaming. Now that she had told Gong Dai all her secrets apart from her rebirth, she naturally felt more assured about this person. Sensing Gong Dai's approach, Gong Yimo subconsciously turned over, hugged his neck, and even rubbed against him. Her sudden hug made Gong Dai's entire body tense up. He didn't even dare to breathe loudly, as if he would disturb her. After waiting for a long time, Gong Yimo didn't make any further moves. Gong Dai slightly relaxed, but also felt a little disappointed. At this moment, they were so close that if Gong Dai moved forward a little, he would be able to suck on her red lips. His Adam's apple moved, and he couldn't help but remember. The last time he kissed her was 1.5 years ago, and that time, he was panicking and afraid, so it was just a light touch. If it was just a hug, he could still control himself, but once he thought about kissing, Gong Dai felt more nervous than when he killed someone for the first time. His palms were sweaty as he hugged Gong Yimo. He pursed his lips, held his breath, and gently pressed his lips on hers. Gong Dai had been holding his breath until the moment he touched her lips. Then, he couldn't help but let out a soft, satisfied sigh. His lips gently rubbed against hers. That soft touch made him feel as if his entire body was wrapped in clouds. The whole world was silent, and there was only her. Everything was her. At this moment, Gong Yimo suddenly moved. He hurriedly retreated like a frightened deer. He looked at her with a panicked expression. In the end, he realized that Gong Yimo was still sleeping. Only then did he start to breathe. His heart was beating very fast. When he kissed her just now, his heart seemed to have stopped beating. When he let go of her, it came back to life and he could breathe again. His white jade-like face was dyed with a touch of color, and his black jade-like eyes seemed to be flowing with water. He was as beautiful as a fairy. Only at this moment did he have the purity and shyness of his age. It was as if he was a fish in a clear spring, and his whole person became lively. Gong Yimo didn't know anything about this. When they were young, they had squeezed on the same bed many times. It was just that he was too young at that time and didn't know anything. After they left the cold palace, they had to hug each other to sleep. So, if it was just the two of them. Gong Dai looked at Gong Yimo in a daze. His fingers traced her face. When his heartbeat calmed down a little, he couldn't wait to lean forward again. His hand supported himself on the haystack beside her head, and he lowered his head to kiss her gently. Only this time, he wasn't satisfied with just a light taste. He gently traced the shape of her lips. Her lips still had the fragrance of the pear blossom wine that she drank just now. It was sweet and almost drove him crazy. Gong Dai felt his heart beating faster and faster. His ears couldn't hear anything again. His entire mind was blank. No, he could hear it. He could hear their breathing entangled together. He could hear his slight panting, and he could hear his deafening heartbeat. Why was she so sweet? So sweet? His fingers tightly grasped the clothes he put on the haystack. At this moment, his body didn't stick to Gong Yimo. Instead, it was tense and suspended in the air. However, it didn't mean that he didn't want to get closer. It was as if something was calling him to do so. Gong Dai's body sank down bit by bit. Gently, he stuck to Gong Yimo. The fire crackled, and 1 or 2 sparks exploded. The sky outside the cave had already darkened. It was snowing heavily, but Gong Dai didn't notice any of this. His whole person was immersed in Gong Yimo's sweetness. Hugging her, kissing her, He had wanted to do this for a long time, but at that time, there were other people's eyes everywhere. He could only restrain himself. But here, in this cave where only they were present, Gong Dai felt like a beast that had been suppressed for a long time had awakened. It was roaring, roaring. He wanted to break free. He impatiently sucked on Gong Yimo's lips. He was extremely careful and crazier as he explored everything about her. He originally thought that he could control it. But when his hand touched Gong Yimo's waist, that touch of warmth and smoothness almost drove Gong Dai crazy. He should be careful. What if he woke up Gong Yimo? But he couldn't control it anymore. He hugged her tighter and tighter. It was as if he wanted to squeeze her entire body into his body. As their lips intertwined, he became more and more unrestrained. He even thought that it would be good if Gong Yimo woke up, seeing his feelings, seeing him go crazy for her, seeing him kissing her so passionately. When he thought about how he would do such a thing to Gong Yimo under her indifferent gaze, he felt his whole body tremble with excitement. He wanted it so much. He really wanted it. So what if he was her younger brother? So what if they were blood relatives? When he was 9 years old, he was drugged by a palace maid. Even though the palace maid failed to seduce him in the end, he already understood what was going on between a man and a woman. There were many people who got married at the age of 14. He already wanted no one else but her. After being tormented like this, Gong Yimo finally felt a little impatient. In a daze, she pushed Gong Dai away. Her reaction made Gong Dai nervous and tremble, but he couldn't help but hug her even tighter. Just like this, she found out about his feelings. Gong Yimo only felt as if she was trapped by something. She couldn't even breathe. Someone was tossing and turning in bed, ravaging her lips and stealing her breath. She couldn't help but mutter, "Stop fooling around." Her voice was so soft and cute. Gong Dai let go of her lips and looked up at her. But he saw that she was still in a deep sleep. She didn't seem to have any intention of waking up. Her eyes were dangerous and dark. If she let him do whatever he wanted, he really wouldn't be able to control himself. At this moment, there seemed to be the sound of horse hooves. Gong Dai was originally in a daze, but when he listened carefully, it was actually the sound of horse hooves. Looking at the beauty in his arms, Gong Dai secretly cursed. He hurriedly carried Gong Yimo and wrapped her in his coat. Braving the wind and snow, he rushed out. Not long after they left, a group of people arrived at the cave. When it snowed heavily, the miasma in the barren miasma plains would dissipate. They had been searching for the entire day. The heavy snow kept falling, which allowed them to find this place safely and smoothly. This group of people were all very tall, and judging from their imposing manner, they were all brave warriors. The leader saw the wolf meat on the ground, picked it up and pinched it. Then, he looked at the fire and narrowed his eyes. Quickly chase after them. We must find them before the heavy snow covers their footprints. Yes, great general. Gong Dai secretly scolded himself. He had let his guard down. Now that the other party had the advantage in numbers, it wasn't good to fight them head-on. They could only use their wits. As the cold wind blew, Gong Yimo gradually woke up. The moment she woke up, she saw Gong Dai carrying her and running. The heavy snow fell on his hair, but she was covered by a coat, so there wasn't any snow on her body. What's wrong? Seeing that she had woken up, Gong Dai was a little annoyed. Nothing. You can continue to rest. But if there are pursuers, I can shake them off. Chapter 114. When Gong Yimo heard that there were pursuers, she could no longer sleep. She secretly cursed herself for causing trouble due to her internal injuries. If not for her injuries, she would not have been so passive. She saw that the sky was already dark and said in annoyance, "It's already so late? Didn't I tell you to wake me up? Aya, or was it because I was drunk?" She patted her head and asked Gong Dai to put her down. Gong Dai knew that she was still injured and refused to agree. However, Gong Yimo had authority after all. When she glared at him, he did not dare to disobey. Looking at the endless snowy night behind them, Gong Yimo said, "You said that they came here on horses?" Gong Dai nodded. Gong Yimo looked at the snow on the ground that reached her feet and sighed inwardly. It had only been a day and the snow was already so thick. We won't be able to outrun their horses if we keep running like this. It would be great if we could snatch one. Gong Dai was also thinking about this problem. Now that they could not erase their footprints, he was worried about Gong Yimo's health if they were to fight recklessly. I have an idea. Gong Yimo smiled slyly and took out a few things from her space. It was a thunderfire that she made that was similar to a thunderbolt bullet. It was not lethal, but if they were on horses, it would be much easier. Hence, after a discussion, they split up. Gong Yimo hid behind a big rock. Indeed, not long after, the sound of horse hooves could be heard. Just when the first scout noticed that the footprints were not right and wanted to return to report, Gong Yimo threw the thunderfire under his horse. The fire and the sound of the explosion made the horse go crazy. It neighed and ran straight into the night. There's an ambush. That person could not help but shout. He was taken away by the frightened horse in an instant. The commotion caused the team behind to immediately be on guard. Gong Yimo did not want to be entangled. She succeeded in getting her way and quickly ran in the direction of the frightened horse. When the pursuers saw that there was no movement, the leader of the group cursed and continued to chase after them. What surprised Gong Yimo was that the horses they were riding were all rare and valuable. Otherwise, how could they run so fast? Gong Yimo felt that she was about to be overtaken by the people behind her, even though she was using her Qing Gong. Now, he could only hope that Gong Dai would be successful. She ran as if her life depended on it. She heard the sound of the wind behind her and instinctively dodged. An arrow fiercely sank into the snow, causing her heart to tremble. When she raised her head, the other party was already very close. She could almost see the other party's deep, hawk-like eyes staring coldly at her. This person, could he be Lu Yi, the famous god of death? Gong Yimo gritted her teeth and threw the last of her lightning fire at them. Then, he turned around and continued running. This time, they were prepared. Moreover, the thunder fire did not have any destructive power. They quickly controlled their horses and continued to chase. Great General, what kind of hidden weapon did he just use? It actually exploded when it landed on the ground. Someone else said, I heard that someone broke out of the encirclement yesterday and used an unknown weapon to attract attention. Could this be the Dai Yu State's secret weapon? The leader of the group laughed coldly. If you want to know, you can just capture him and interrogate him. As he spoke, he took out a second arrow. He squinted his eyes and aimed at Gong Yimo again. It was very difficult to aim on horseback, but this person had such a talent. He could see in the dark and shot another arrow. That arrow was like a ray of silver light in the night. It was aimed at Gong Yimo's back with irresistible force, but only a crisp sound was heard. The arrow was deflected by a rock and fiercely sank into the snow. Gong Dai rode a horse and rushed over. He looked at the person who shot the arrow with murderous eyes. He stretched out his hand and Gong Yimo tacitly jumped onto the horse. Are you okay? Gong Dai asked. He had spent some time taming this horse. Almost. Gong Yimo was almost injured. Gong Yimo hugged his waist and rested. I'm fine. Gong Dai was still worried. They have people who can see in the dark and are very good at archery. Royal sister, sit in front of me. Gong Yimo smiled when she heard this. Don't worry. As she spoke, she took out a wooden shield from her storage space. I came to save you, but I've already made preparations. Gong Dai was still worried, but the people behind him were hot on his heels. He had no time to say more and could only urge the horse to gallop forward. The people behind him chased relentlessly. When they got closer, the leader sneered. How stupid! As he spoke, he interlocked his thumb and index finger, put it between his lips and let out a long whistle. It was said that an old horse knew the way. These horses were all raised by him, so how could they listen to an outsider? As he spoke, the horse under Gong Dai let out a long neigh. Its front hooves were raised high, and it actually stopped galloping. Gong Dai was thrown by the horse and quickly pulled the reins. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the leader knocked his bow again and shot an arrow in one smooth motion. An arrow was flying straight towards them. However, Gong Dai had no time to care about it. He pulled out a dagger and stabbed it into the horse's body. The horse under him let out a miserable cry and galloped forward again. The arrow also sank into the shield. The huge impact caused Gong Yimo to fall onto Gong Dai. "Royal sister, what's the matter?" Gong Dai asked anxiously. Gong Yimo exclaimed, "He's really strong. He's not easy to deal with. Let's go quickly." Gong Dai then galloped forward, and the horse under him seemed to not care about its life. It actually managed to shake off the pursuers. The general was so angry that his face turned ashen. He quickly gave a secret signal to the border guards to surround them. Unexpectedly, another team arrived just in time. When Gong Dai reached the border, they engaged in a chaotic battle with Liu Ye's men. It was the emperor's elite troops. They were finally here. Gong Dai took advantage of this opportunity to snatch a long spear and prepared to fight his way out of the encirclement. Gong Yimo also had a hidden sword in her hand. Wherever she went, the snow was dyed red with blood. They cooperated very well. Gong Dai charged forward while Gong Yimo guarded against sneak attacks. They galloped forward with irresistible force. The elite troops protected them as they retreated. Their weapons clashed in the night sky, creating sparks. Under the deterrence of Gong Dai, who was like a god of death, the group quickly fought their way out of the encirclement and reached the border. At this time, the pursuers behind them finally arrived. Looking at the old general who had guarded Shizhou for 10 years, the leader stopped his horse and stared at them. "Grandfather." Gong Ju saw the old man in armor at a glance and called out to him. Seeing that Gong Dai was still alive, Shenshi of Gojoseon felt a lump in his throat and almost cried. However, now was not the time for romance. He ordered his men to engage the pursuers in battle. His eyes were fixed on the young general across the battlefield. Shenshi of Gojoseon was able to reach his position because he was skilled in martial arts. He had also heard of the person opposite him. He was Liu Ye's youngest general and had excellent archery skills. The two of them looked at each other and joined the battle together. Shenshi of Gojoseon only had one thought, and that was to stop them. Chapter 115. Most of Liu Ye's troops had been withdrawn, but there were still quite a few of them left. Many of them were still on their way. Shenshi of Gojoseon had 70,000 troops under him, and they were also on their way. Therefore, they were not afraid of him in terms of numbers. Gong Dai knew that this massacre had started because of him. As long as he could fight his way out of the encirclement and return to Daiyu State, Liu Ye would have no choice but to withdraw his troops no matter how unwilling he was. Therefore, he did not look back and continued forward. As blood splattered everywhere, it seemed to have dyed his eyes red. His killing power was too strong, and with Gong Yimo's protection, he was not hurt at all. Seeing that the most important person was about to leave, and the troops stationed in Daiyu State were gathering, he was blocked by Shenshi of Gojoseon. The general gritted his teeth, but there was nothing he could do. He released the signal while watching Gong Dai leave unwillingly. Now, he could only hope that there were a few checkpoints left, and that someone would be able to stop Gong Dai. As the signal flare shot into the sky, Liu Ye's troops all around seemed to have gone crazy. They were all searching for and intercepting Gong Dai and his wife. Gong Dai kept moving forward. Along the way, he had killed countless people. Liu Ye's scattered soldiers were everywhere. They looked at him as if he was their father's murderer. He could not stop for even a moment. He could not stop either. The sooner he returned to Daiyu State, the fewer people his grandfather's subordinates would die. Only then would Royal Sister be safe. This was a race against time, and it was a battle of life and death. It only gradually subsided before dawn. When the last enemy fell, the horse under Gong Dai finally collapsed. Gong Dai quickly dodged and jumped off with Gong Yimo behind him. Looking up, he could vaguely see the huge city walls shrouded in the dusk. Gong Dai's blood-stained face finally revealed a smile. "Royal Sister, do you see us? We're out." However, he did not get an answer. The cold and wet feeling in his hand made his heart tremble. When he lowered his head, Gong Yimo's pale face was almost transparent under the morning light. He could not help but look at the broken shield on the ground. Along the way, Gong Yimo had used this shield to block countless attacks for him. The most obvious thing was the arrow that was deeply embedded in the shield. That person's strength was not only strong, but the arrow also pierced through the shield. He even injured Gong Yimo. Gongju felt as if his whole body had been hit by something. He hugged her tightly and almost couldn't return to his senses. Could it be that royal sister had endured her injuries to protect him all this while? Had she fought her way out with him? He was really useless, really useless. He actually injured her. How could he let her get hurt in front of him? This feeling made him feel as if he had returned to the night in the cold palace when he was 9 years old. That night, Gong Yimo killed 13 people and hugged him in front of the emperor. She was seriously injured, but she fought for him. But he had worked hard for so many years and done so many things. In the end, he was still the one who was protected. When he carried her into the city, Gong Dai did not stop thinking. Why was he still so weak? Yesterday, he was still thinking that as long as he could be with Gong Yimo, he did not want to be a prince. He did not want power. But today, reality had given him a hard blow. Without status, without power, how could he protect the person he loved? How could he? Gong Yimo's breathing was very light. It was so light that it was almost non-existent. She was just like when she was recovering in Taiji Palace. She was just as pale, just as fragile, as if she would leave him in the next second. No, he would not allow it. The overlapping figures gradually ran over. The guards of the West Province took a closer look and exclaimed in surprise. It's His Highness. His Highness is back. He's still alive. Quickly open the city gates. His words made many people move. Their running was mixed with cheers. What Gong Dai had done had already spread throughout the West Province. If it were not for Gong Dai, they might have been ambushed by Liu Ye's men and killed without a trace. Luckily, he was there. But before the soldiers could open the city gates, the gates were kicked open by Gong Dai. At this moment, his eyes were bloodshot and his black hair was messy. He was hugging someone like a crazy demon. Doctor, where's the doctor? Before the soldiers had time to congratulate him, they were frightened by Gongju's appearance. For a long time, Gongju had been humble and approachable. They had never seen Gongju like this. At this time, when he stared at them, they felt as if they were being cut by a knife. The doctor is at the clinic. At this time, where could the doctor be if not at the clinic? When Gong Dai heard this, he immediately ran to the nearest clinic. You must make it in time. Nothing must happen to royal sister. Originally, the doctor was very dissatisfied when the gates were kicked open. But when he saw Gong Dai, his dissatisfaction immediately disappeared. But before he could say anything, he was dragged to the front of the bed by Gong Dai. Save her. The doctor was shocked by him and hurriedly looked at the person on the bed. The little girl in front of him seemed to have lost a lot of blood and looked extremely weak. The doctor stroked his beard and shook his head. Her condition doesn't look too good. Your Highness, you. The rest of his words were blocked in his throat by Gong Dai's murderous gaze. It was too scary. Was this really the gaze of a human and not a beast? He stared at the doctor expressionlessly. His pale face, red eyes, and black hair formed the most soul-stirring appearance. But at this moment, his murderous aura was wanton, as if it was real. His forbearing and cold voice rang out word by word. Save her. Otherwise, I will bury your entire family with her. His words were like a curse that deeply trapped the doctor. The poor old man's body trembled and his legs trembled. He was convinced that if he really couldn't save this person, the other party would definitely do that. Yes, 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 I will save her. I will. This treatment took the entire morning. Just as he was sweating profusely, Shunshi of Gojoseon finally returned. After Gong Dai left, the other party didn't harass him and retreated early. He was slightly injured, but when he heard that the princess was injured, he hurriedly bandaged his wounds and brought many doctors over, hoping to help. When the doctors came in, they saw Gong Dai standing by the bed like a demon god. They didn't dare to move. Sensing the arrival of people, Gong Dai's eyes moved and locked onto them. He opened his mouth and his voice was a little hoarse. Come here and save her, or die. The word died was said by him expressionlessly, and it was filled with murderous intent. They didn't have time to think about the change in Gong Dai's attitude. They only knew that they had to listen to him quickly. Otherwise, their lives would be in danger. Many people gathered around the bed. Under Gong Dai's cold stare, they were sweating profusely. Jinshi of Gojoseon couldn't stand it anymore and came over to persuade him. Don't be nervous. The princess will be fine. However, his words didn't receive a response for a long time. Jinshi of Gojoseon looked over and saw that under Gong Dai's cold expression, his entire body was trembling uncontrollably. He wasn't threatening them. He was afraid. He was actually afraid. This realization made Jinshi of Gojoseon's heart tremble. He couldn't help but look at the little girl on the bed. At this moment, her face was pale, like a lifeless doll. You're right. She will be fine. After a while, Gong Dai's lips trembled as he said these words word by word. Nothing is allowed to happen to her. Chapter 116. Gong Dai did not know how many people came in and out, but his eyes were fixed on Gong Yimo. It was as if he could not see the anxiety, uneasiness, and seriousness on the faces of the others. Jinshi of Gojoseon could not stand it anymore. He pulled someone aside and asked, "How's the situation?" That person looked at Gong Dai carefully. When he saw that Gong Dai was not looking at him, he was slightly relieved and whispered to Jinshi of Gojoseon, "The situation is not good. I thought it was just an external injury. Who knew that there was poison on the arrow? Luckily, she took the antidote in time and is still here. However, this little girl's internal injury has not recovered. Now that she has lost too much blood, I'm afraid." His words were frozen by a murderous aura. When he looked up, he saw that Gong Dai was glaring at him fiercely. Suddenly, his lips curled into a cold smile. It was hair-raising. Afraid of what? His voice was as light as a feather, but it made the doctor's Adam's apple move, his lips tremble, and his face turn pale with fright. How could he still say anything? Jinshi Wang hurriedly waved his hand to dismiss him. The doctor immediately trotted away. When he went out, he even tripped because of his weak legs. Jinshi of Gojoseon sighed. "Don't worry, Your Highness. I have posted a recruitment notice for famous doctors. The princess will be fine." Gong Dai did not seem to hear Jinshi of Gojoseon's comforting words. Instead, he looked at Gong Yimo again. His expression suddenly became sorrowful. They had only reunited for a few days, and he had already implicated her again. This hatred and self-reproach made him feel as if his heart was about to split open. Why was he still not strong enough? Gong Yimo was unconscious because of the poison and excessive blood loss. Gong Dai insisted on feeding her ginseng soup every day. Only then did she look healthy again. The reward on the list had been raised from 5,000 taels of gold to 100,000 taels of gold by Gong Dai. However, there was only one condition. Those who could not be cured would be cut in half at the waist. As a result, many quacks were scared off, and many people sighed. Since no one came, Gongju secretly sent a lot of people to capture the so-called famous doctors. However, many of these people were angered by Gongju and killed many of them in a fit of anger. Just like that, 7 days passed. These 7 days were so long. Gong Yimo could not help but become thinner and weaker. This made Gong Dai so mad that he wanted to kill someone several times. The entire residence of Jinshi of Gojoseon was filled with a tense atmosphere. No one dared to speak loudly. He didn't know who that little girl was. She actually made His Highness, who was like a fairy child, become like a demon. What they didn't know was that he was originally a demon god, but he had concealed himself because of Gong Yimo. Now that she was in trouble, Gong Dai was like a trapped beast, frantically trying to break free from his cage and tear the whole world apart. And all of this had changed because of the arrival of a certain person. You said that you can save her? Gongju's pair of cold eyes stared at the newcomer. The man was probably in his 20s, but he didn't look like a good person. He was obviously a man, but he was dressed in bright red clothes. Although his face was handsome, it was very evil. Every time he looked at people, it was as if he was scheming against them. It was disgusting. Hearing Gong Dai's question, the other party took a sip of water from a trifling cup. Then, he raised the corner of his mouth and smiled at Gong Dai. At the same time, He sized up Gong Dai. That's right. I can save her. Tell me your name. The man smiled again. There was an indescribable evil in his smile. Si Wuyan. Gong Dai immediately remembered who this person was. Gui Jianqiu, Si Wuyan. It was said that his medical skills were superb, and he had a ruthless personality. Although his medical skills were superb, he didn't easily save people. In other words, even if he saved people, he would kill them in the end. It was as if life and death were just a game, just like a rumor that had spread before. A woman had somehow met him and learned that his medical skills were superb. She begged him to save her husband, and Si Wuyan only made one request. If the woman could stay in a brothel for a day, he would save her. The woman loved her husband so much that she gritted her teeth and agreed. She didn't expect Si Wuyan to save the man that night and personally bring him to the brothel to find his wife. When the man saw the woman, he was furious. He refused to listen to her explanation and wanted to divorce her. The woman was heartbroken. Although she was still a virgin, she had to die to prove it. After the woman jumped into the lake, Si Wuyan smiled and told her husband the reason. He said that all of this was just a joke. Who knew that she would die just like that? He also said that his wife had been protected by him all this time. She was in the brothel, but no one touched her. When the man heard this, he was so regretful that he didn't want to live. After getting drunk, he jumped into the same river and killed himself. When the corpse was salvaged, Si Wuyan was sitting on the bridge in his iconic red clothes. He was drinking and laughing at the same time. Fearing his methods, no one dared to criticize him, but his bad reputation spread. There were countless similar incidents, so Si Wuyan's reputation in the 4 countries was very bad. Gui Jianqiu. Firstly, his medical skills were superb. If he wanted to save someone, even the king of hell couldn't pull him away. Secondly, his character was too unpredictable, ruthless, and vicious. Even ghosts were afraid of him. Many fragments of Si Wuyan's bad reputation flashed through Gong Dai's mind, but he only remembered one thing. This person's medical skills were superb. I want you to save someone. What do you want? Si Wuyan blinked and leaned against the armrest. He supported his chin with the back of his hand and said lazily, Save who? You, what price are you willing to pay? Gong Dai lowered his eyelids and said softly, Save my family. Oh? He seemed to be interested. How close? Gong Dai glanced at him coldly with a hint of murderous intent. You just have to say your conditions. Si Wuyan saw him like this and couldn't help but touch his chin. Then what are you willing to pay? Gong Dai didn't hesitate at all and looked straight at him. My everything. His words were so straightforward that Si Wuyan was a little stunned. But soon, he revealed a strange smile. Including your life? Including my life. Only then did Si Wuyan smile and rub his palms together. What should I do? There seems to be something fun. I wonder if the famous royal siblings of Dai Yu State will be fun. When Gong Yimo woke up, she felt very weak. She felt that her internal organs were in pain. Someone was feeding her a bowl of something very thick. She swallowed it subconsciously. There was a fishy taste. It was bitter and astringent, making her want to vomit. And she did so. She vomited out the medicine that was fed to her. The smell of the medicine was so strong that she almost fainted. You're awake, Gong Dai said happily. When Gong Yimo woke up and saw Gong Dai's ghostly pale face, she was really shocked. Gong Dai was originally fair, the kind that wouldn't get tanned under the sun. But at this moment, his face was frighteningly pale. At first glance, Gong Yimo couldn't accept it. What happened to you? She hadn't spoken for a long time. Her throat was very uncomfortable, but she still expressed her concern. Chapter 117. When Gong Dai saw that she had woken up, he revealed a pale but gentle smile. I'm fine. It's good that you're awake. Gong Yimo frowned. How could this be considered fine? She was about to speak when she suddenly felt a sharp pain in her insides. Yes, she had been poisoned. However, she had been running for her life and did not dare to let Gong Dai know that she had taken the antidote. But looking at her now, the poison had not been neutralized. She did not know what kind of poison could be so powerful. Seeing her frown, Gong Yimo became anxious again. Are you all right? I'll call the doctor. Gong Yimo pulled him back. She wanted to say that she was fine, but when she touched Gong Dai's wrist, he reflexively dodged. Gong Yimo felt that it was strange. She unconsciously pulled up his sleeve to take a look. There were knife marks all over. What's going on? Gong Yimo's expression immediately turned serious. She remembered clearly when they had fought their way out of the encirclement. Gong Dai was not injured. Then where did these wounds come from? Why did it look like they had been cut by herself? There were a total of 7. Gong Dai withdrew his hand and smiled. I'm fine, royal sister. Wait here. I'll call the person who treated you. Wait. Gong Yimo coughed softly and asked him again with a grave expression. Let me ask you, what's with these wounds? Naturally, it's because of you. A rather sinister voice came from afar. Gong Yimo raised her head and was dazzled by Si Wuyan, who was dressed in a bright red robe. Her pupils shrank. It was actually him. Gong Yimo lowered her eyelids and suppressed the doubts in her heart. She asked without batting an eyelid. What do you mean? Si Wuyan laughed heartily. I told him that you had injured your core due to excessive blood loss. Only by using the blood of your bloodkin could you be saved. So these wounds on his body were all cut when he let your blood out. What? Gong Yimo flew into a rage. Others might not know, but how could she not know? She and Gong Dai were not related by blood at all. However, the fact that she was able to wake up now proved that the blood wasn't related by blood. It was complete nonsense. However, Si Wuyan did not know that. Seeing Gong Yimo's angry expression, he said, Not only did you lose a lot of blood, but you were also poisoned. My prescription is not wrong. Now that you are still poisoned, it seems that your blood contribution is not enough. If this drags on, the poison will enter your lungs and I can't do anything about it. As he spoke, he frowned and pretended to be concerned. But this young man has lost too much blood recently. If he bleeds more, he will probably die. But if he doesn't bleed, you will die. What do you think we should do? I have no problem. I can continue. After coldly saying this to Si Wuyan, Gong Dai turned his head and smiled at Gong Yimo. Although he looked tired, there was a hint of satisfaction. That's great. You're finally awake. Gong Yimo's heart ached when she saw his smile. She said fiercely, Someone come. A servant hurriedly walked in. Gong Yimo said, Boil another bowl of the medicine that I usually use. I spat it out just now. When the servant heard this, he looked directly at Gong Dai. He knew clearly that the medicine that this young miss wanted to use must be mixed with His Highness's blood. However, Gong Dai seemed to be used to it. He rolled up his sleeves, as if he wanted to stab himself again. Gong Yimo hurriedly pulled him back and said to the servant, Use chicken blood or pig blood. Go. Si Wuyan chuckled. That won't do. The medicine that I prescribe will be affected if there is even the slightest difference. Gong Dai patted the back of Gong Yimo's hand and said in a low and obedient voice, Don't worry, I'm fine. It would be strange if he was fine. Gong Yimo secretly cursed Si Wuyan in her heart for killing without spilling blood. She directly said to the servant, Why aren't you going? When the servant heard this, he hurriedly left. However, Gong Dai felt that something was wrong. Originally, he didn't believe Si Wuyan's words. However, after he tried his prescription once, Gong Yimo's complexion improved a lot. That was why he repeatedly let out his blood to prescribe medicine for Gong Yimo. However, Gong Yimo firmly held him back and said sternly, When have I ever lied to you? Don't you believe me? Gong Dai couldn't help but think that Gong Yimo really had never lied to him. That was why he didn't say anything even though he was still a little hesitant. He was too tired. He had lost too much blood and too little sleep. Whenever he thought about this, his entire head would ache. At this moment, Gong Yimo woke up. He also felt that his eyes were dry and burning. He leaned his head on her shoulder and wanted to hug her to sleep. The medicine was quickly sent over. As it was often simmered, Gong Yimo took it and was about to drink it. At this moment, Si Wuyan's cold voice sounded. He felt very unhappy that he didn't see the scene of the siblings killing each other, so his tone became displeased. You have to think carefully. The medicine is very strong. Without his blood mixed in to combine the medicine's medicinal properties, you'll definitely die if you drink it. When Gong Dai heard this, his originally drowsy mind immediately cleared up. He looked at the medicine bowl and whispered to Gong Yimo, "Just use my blood. I'm really fine." Si Wuyin looked at Gong Dai in amusement. This young boy was really wholehearted, but this girl, when faced with her own life, he wanted to see how she would choose. Who knew that Gong Yimo didn't even need to choose? She blocked Gong Dai with one hand and poured the medicine down her throat with the other. Gong Dai suddenly became nervous and widened his eyes. This medicine was really disgusting. It was bitter and astringent. She even suspected that Si Wuyin had deliberately added salt to it to prank her. Seeing that she really drank it, Gong Dai anxiously looked at her expression. Si Wuyin's smile was a little stiff. He really didn't expect that someone would disregard her life like this. Was she really not afraid of death, or was she really confident that her judgment was right? Boring. Not fun at all. Gong Yimo's bitter little face scrunched up, but she still gave Gong Dai a smile that was uglier than crying. "See, I'm fine. This person is too evil. He did it on purpose." Seeing that Gong Yimo was really fine, Gong Dai heaved a sigh of relief. He no longer had the energy to find trouble with Si Wuyin. He was really too tired, so he leaned on Gong Yimo and fell asleep. Gong Yimo was shocked. Seeing that he was just sleeping, she couldn't help but feel sorry. She didn't dare to wake him up. She could only stare fiercely at Si Wuyin. Why was this person so evil? He was really just like his mother. His entire heart was completely black. Si Wuyin didn't seem to see her fierce gaze. He lazily yawned. "Don't think of doing anything to me. There's still poison in your body. It's Lu Ye's most famous scorpion poison. Without me, you'll definitely die." Gong Yimo sneered. "Anyway, you didn't really want to save me. Who doesn't know that the famous Guijian Cho Si Wuyin is famous for being cold-blooded? You save people just to change the way they die. It's nothing more than playing around and killing a few more people. Perhaps he had other motives." Speaking of this, her expression became colder. "No matter what you want to do, I can't ignore it. But you hurt Gong Dai." Chapter 118. She gently placed Gong Dai on the bed. Although it was a little strenuous, she still walked step by step toward Si Wuyin. Gong Yimo knew that although Si Wuyin looked arrogant, other than his superb medical skills, he was completely powerless. Seeing Gong Yimo approaching, Si Wuyin's expression finally changed. He sat up a little straighter and narrowed his eyes dangerously. "How dare you? If you dare to touch a single hair on my head, you can wait for the poison to take effect and die." Gong Yimo's face was pale, but thanks to the ginseng soup that Gong Dai had fed her, after moving a little, she gradually regained some strength. "These are two different matters. You saving me is one matter, but if you hurt him, that's asking for death." Gong Yimo's expression turned cold. Her slender jade-like hand gripped his throat. She didn't use any strength, but Si Wuyin's expression was tense as he looked at her with hatred. "You can try. You must know that during this period, I've poisoned Gong Dai, and other than me, no one else can cure him. You're not afraid of death, but aren't you afraid of his death?" Gong Yimo smiled. Her fingers gradually tightened, and a cold expression appeared on her face. "Even if the child I raise gets distracted because of me, he will never fall into your trap." Si Wuyin couldn't refute her words. Indeed, during this period of time, no matter how he tried to lay his hands on Gong Dai would always avoid him. He was clearly still a youth, but the way he looked at him was filled with death. Sometimes, he felt that if he hadn't saved this girl, Gong Dai would have killed him long ago. The more he thought about it, the more jealous and resentful he felt. Why? They were clearly not biological siblings from the same mother, but they understood each other so well and trusted each other so much. They were even willing to sacrifice for each other without holding back. Why? That was why he wanted to destroy it. There was no such thing as a beautiful relationship in this world. They didn't change because they weren't tempted enough. The more Si Wuyin thought about it, the more hatred he felt. Gong Yimo's fingers tightened again and again, causing him to gradually suffocate. Am I going to die? He died just like that? It was good that he was dead. He couldn't stay in this dirty world any longer. Si Wuyin's face became redder and redder. He was sitting down while Gong Yimo was standing. Her fair hands were bursting with destructive power. Her eyes were calm and tranquil, as if she was not killing people, but doing something extremely ordinary. Finally, when Si Wuyin opened his mouth and the veins on his forehead bulged, she released her hand. The sudden rush of air caused Si Wuyin to bend over violently and cough violently. He fell to the ground and could no longer maintain his usual high and mighty demeanor. His body curled up into a ball on the ground as he coughed extremely miserably. Gong Yimo's body also swayed slightly. She held onto the table by the side and closed her eyes. Just now, just a little bit more, and she would have killed the other party. As the person involved, Si Wuyin knew even more clearly that Gong Yimo wasn't scaring him or joking. She really would have killed him. This knowledge made Si Wuyin feel fear in hindsight. The reason why he was able to play around with others so easily was because they all had weaknesses in their hearts and needed his help. However, he met Gong Yimo. This girl, knowing that she could die, still dared to change his prescription and drink that bowl of medicine, all because she didn't want her brother to get hurt again. When her life was in her hands, she dared to make a move just to vent her anger for her brother. Her brother was such a powerful person, but he was still manipulated by her. But she was different. It wasn't that she didn't care about her own life or her brother. She had confidence in herself and the people around her. She wasn't afraid of death, which was why she dared to do so. Therefore, Si Wuyin couldn't do anything to her. A person who wasn't afraid of death and had a strong mind had no weaknesses. Seeing that he finally caught his breath, Gong Yimo unknowingly put on a smiling face. She patted the non-existent dust off her hands. That smile actually made Si Wuyin, who was known as Gue Jianqiu, feel his scalp tingle. Gong Yimo giggled and said, "I often hear people say that Gue Jianqiu means what he says. If he says he will save someone, he will definitely not let them die. That's why he's known as Gue Jianqiu. So me, will you continue to save or not?" Si Wuyin was speechless. Gong Yimo only smiled. She was someone who had been reborn. Know yourself and know your enemy, and you will never be defeated. If Si Wuyin rejected her, she had 100 ways to make him agree. Si Wuyin glared at her fiercely. He struggled to get up and sneered. "Don't worry, I will save you. Then, I will make you die even more miserably." Gong Yimo saw that he was about to leave and didn't stop him. She smiled faintly and said, "If that's the case, thank you very much." Not knowing why, seeing Gong Yimo so proud, Si Wuyin couldn't take it lying down. He thought of something and stopped. Suddenly, he smiled. "You don't know, right? That guy on the bed. Not only did I trick him to cut his wrists, I also said that I wanted his flesh as an ingredient. He really cut off a piece of his flesh. I wonder how it would feel to eat your own brother's flesh." After saying that, he saw Gong Yimo's expression change. He felt proud and elated. He laughed and left. His last sentence was like a thorn, piercing Gong Yimo's heart painfully. She rushed to the side of the bed. Her originally angry expression softened when she saw Gong Dai's pale face and turned into a faint bitterness and pain. That's right. What right did she have to be angry? Gong Dai was such an intelligent person, but he allowed Si Wuyin to manipulate him. It was all for her sake. Thinking of this, she smiled helplessly and sat next to Gong Dai. Now, she had just woken up and Gong Dai had collapsed. This was really. When Gong Dai opened his eyes again, it was already the afternoon of the next day. When he opened his eyes, he felt very dizzy. So when he saw the light purple curtain above his head, his expression was dazed for a moment. "You're finally awake." Gong Yimo's voice was full of vitality. Gong Dai came back to his senses and was a little puzzled. She was clearly so weak and pale just a moment ago. Gong Yimo's body was now recovering. As for the poison, she felt fine, so there was no need for her to appear so weak. Gong Dai looked Gong Yimo up and down. Seeing that she really looked much better, he couldn't help but smile. At this time, his face was pale and his eyes were exquisite. His smile was like a delicate porcelain that had come alive, beautiful yet fragile. Yes, fragile. This realization made Gong Yimo's heart skip a beat. In Gong Yimo's mind, Gong Dai had always been the future Gong Dai who had grown up, and he had always done well. He was sensible, intelligent, and knew when to advance and retreat. Whether it was in the Cold Palace or the Imperial Palace, he actually took care of her more in some aspects. Although Gong Yimo had always treated herself as a guardian, there were many times when she didn't do a good job. Instead, it was this child who took care of everything and didn't make her worry at all. Chapter 119. That was why she believed in Gong Dai, trusted in his ability, and unknowingly relied on him. But yesterday, when he had fallen asleep on her shoulder, his eyes had dimmed. Gong Yimo blamed herself. Perhaps she had thought of relying on him in the future, but later on, she really wanted to raise this youth well. At least, she didn't want him to become as cold and cruel as he was in her previous life. Royal sister, are you still feeling unwell? How's the poison in your body? Gong Dai rested on the bed and asked. Gong Yimo smiled. My body is much better. As for the poison, it's not a big problem. You don't have to worry about it. Gong Dai's expression showed that he didn't agree. He really couldn't ignore such a carefree person like Royal Sister. Gong Yimo didn't wait for him to speak and pulled up his sleeves. Seeing those wounds, her eyes flashed with a trace of heartache. That damned Siwu Yin. If it wasn't for his pitiful background, she really wouldn't have let him off like that. You're still talking about me. Look at you. Gong Yimo suddenly stopped talking and lowered her head to apply medicine on Gong Dai. Seeing Gong Yimo's unhappy expression, Gong Dai didn't dare to say anything and obediently let her apply the medicine. In fact, he had treated these wounds well himself. He also took medicine to replenish blood every day. After all, he could only take care of himself in order to take care of Gong Yimo. After all, that Siwu Yin obviously had ulterior motives. It was just that his medicine wasn't as good as the ones in Gong Yimo's space. During those few years when she was pampered, she found a lot of good things in her space. She didn't expect that it would really come in handy. Gong Yimo lowered her head and silently applied medicine on Gong Dai while using her fingers to gently trace the wounds. There were a total of 7 wounds. These were all left because of her. Idiot! Do you believe everything he says? Don't you know how to do an experiment and try to make medicine without using blood? If I had woken up a little later, would you have been drained of blood by him? Gong Ju heard her words and glanced at her with a rather shy and serious smile. I won't let Royal Sister take any risks. Therefore, even if Siwu Yin was lying to him, he didn't dare to disobey. His words made Gong Yimo's nose sour, and she almost burst into tears. It wasn't easy for her to raise Gong Ju until he was white and tender. She even managed to remove the old scars on his body one by one. But now, because of her actions, there were a lot of scars. She felt angry and suffocated. More than that, he blamed himself. If she had been more careful at that time and had not been injured by that arrow, Gong Dai would not have ended up like this. Gong Dai sighed in his heart. He felt Gong Yimo carefully apply medicine and bandage his wounds. Her careful and cautious manner reminded him of the first time they met. She was very impatient, but she still fed him medicine. That was when he felt the most terrible. His mother had died tragically, and he had been banished to the Cold Palace for 2 years. He gritted his teeth and endured all kinds of humiliation and torture. He had endured it all. However, on that day, the servant girl who had sworn loyalty to him betrayed him. He was even forced to drink poison. At that time, he really thought he was going to die. His entire body was in pain, and his throat felt like it was being cut by knives. He was full of hatred and resentment. He couldn't wait to grow up and kill all these people. He also resented why he had to suffer all these hardships, while the other princes were happily hiding in their mother's arms. However, Gong Yimo appeared. Not only did she save him, she also left him food. At that time, food was very precious because she was scarily thin and looked even more miserable than him. Later, Gong Yimo left, but he fainted. His body could not withstand the hunger and beatings at that time. He was woken up by the rain. On that night of thunder and lightning, the cold rain hit his face, and it hurt. At that time, his throat was still very painful, and he didn't know when it had started to burn. He was hungry and cold, but his body was alternating between hot and cold. When he thought about what he had been through these past few years, he couldn't help but feel disheartened. He even thought that it would be better if he just died like this. That day was really too difficult to endure. However, just as his head was getting heavier and heavier, and he was about to fall asleep, Gong Yimo's figure flashed across his mind. At that time, he thought that his royal sister was still a woman, and she had been sick for a long time, but she never gave up. She lived on strongly and even helped him. What right did he have to give up? Therefore, he gritted his teeth and endured the pain all over his body. He slowly crawled into the room, and only then did he feel relieved and faint. Before he fainted, he was worried that he would fall seriously ill, and that he would directly die of illness or become a fool. He had once seen a palace servant who had become a fool because of a fever. If he also became a fool, he would be muddle-headed and unable to turn around for the rest of his life. It would be better for him to die. However, he was saved by someone, and it was the royal sister that he had never met before. At first, he pretended to be asleep, but when the other party wrapped a soft coat around him, it immediately drove away all the coldness. That kind of warmth was enough to make him remember it for the rest of his life. Later on, he thought more than once that the reason why God made him suffer was because he was going to send the best person in the world to his side. She would erase all his pain and resentment and bring him all the light and happiness. And he, who had this person, was afraid that even God would be jealous of him. Therefore, he deserved all the suffering. This was also the woman he loved. Gong Dai looked at Gong Yimo in a daze. At this time, she lowered her head to do the final bandage. Her small mouth was pursed, as if she had been wronged, and also as if she was sulking. Those pair of beautiful eyes were full of water, but no tears fell. Gong Dai suddenly felt that to be able to receive her love, this injury was worth it. To be honest, the process of falling in love with her was both happy and painful. It was happy because her existence made people happy. It was painful because in the future, all the men could rightfully ask to marry her, but only he could not. There was a period of time when he even resented. Why did he have to like someone who was impossible? But as time passed, everything had an answer. Because there were only two choices for her: to like her or to like her more. If there was a third choice, it would be the one he chose now. To like her, until he couldn't extricate himself. If there had to be a reason for loving her, it would be that no one could not love her after spending time with her. No one. Just as Gong Dai was sighing aimlessly, Gong Yimo pulled down his sleeve, put her hands on her hips, and looked at him very seriously. Are there any more injuries? Gong Dai was a little puzzled. No. Gong Yimo bit her lower lip and said with difficulty, Yesterday, Si Wuyin told me. He said that you cut a piece of your flesh. At this point, she really couldn't bear to continue. Her small mouth pursed. Let me see the wound. Gong Dai looked a little embarrassed. It's okay. I've already applied medicine. It's already starting to scab. Chapter 120. No way. Gong Yimo was especially insistent on this matter, shaking her head like a rattle drum. I want you to show me. I want to see. Now, right now. She had just recovered from a serious injury, so Gong Dai did not dare to disobey her. So even though he was unwilling, he still slowly pulled up his pants. A shocking scar the size of a bowl appeared on his thigh. Even though she was already prepared, when she saw it, Gong Yimo gasped and quickly leaned over to take a look. She was speechless for a long time. Now his wound had already started to scab, but it was still bleeding. It was horrifying. Seeing Gong Yimo leaning over, Gong Dai sat on the bed and shrunk back uncomfortably. His cheeks flushed red, but he felt that the position was a little too awkward. He was a little uncomfortable, but Gong Yimo did not notice this at all. She sat on the edge of the bed and leaned over to take a closer look. That frightening wound made her lose her soul for a long time. This piece of flesh was cut off by him, but he let someone cook it and let her drink it. She did not know why, but she did not feel disgusted at all. She only felt uncomfortable, as if something was boiling in her heart. It made her want to go out and hack Si Wuyin to death. Why are you so stupid? He wants you to bleed. You bleed. He wants you to cut off your flesh. You cut off your flesh. Then what if he wants you to die? You also want to die. Gong Yimo could not help but roar at Gong Dai due to the nameless anger. She did not know who she was angry at, but she just could not control herself. Seeing her like this, Gong Dai smiled very good-naturedly, but his tone was calm and determined. As long as he says he can save you, I will give it to him, even if it is my life. His expression gradually softened, and when he thought that his flesh was eaten by Gong Yimo, Gong Dai actually felt strangely satisfied, as if he and the royal sister had become one. This must be an illness, but what could he do? He could not control this thought. Gong Yimo only bit her lip and looked at him fiercely. After a while, she bent down again and used the best Yurong powder in the palace to apply medicine on him. Unfortunately, her jade countenance powder could regenerate muscles and remove scars, but its main purpose was to remove scars. Its effect on regenerating muscles that were missing a piece of flesh was too limited. The cold cream accompanied her trembling fingertips as it landed on the frightening wound. Under the pain, coldness, and numbness, Gong Dai was very impetuous. He lowered his head and only saw her hair. She lowered her head and almost pressed it against the wound. He couldn't see her expression, but he knew that she was very upset. Gong Dai couldn't help but reach out and stroke her hair. It's okay. It doesn't hurt anymore, really. But as soon as he finished speaking, warm water droplets fell on his legs. 1 drop, 2 drops. They fell silently. Gong Dai was startled and hurriedly straightened her body. It turned out that at some point in time, her face was already covered in tears. How could it not hurt? This injury, you took it for me. She raised her head and glared at Gong Dai with hatred and grievance. Her eyeballs were like pearls with a broken string that kept falling. It doesn't hurt for you, but it hurts for me. Gong Dai couldn't hold it in anymore. He leaned over and hugged her, forcefully carrying her onto the couch. Don't cry. He was very flustered. He was afraid to see Gong Yimo's tears. It would make his heart feel as if it was being torn apart and painful, but he didn't dare to stop her. He couldn't even bear to raise his voice. He could only let Gong Yimo's tears fall drop by drop on his shoulder, repeating it over and over again in an extremely clumsy and helpless manner. Don't cry. Being injured for you. I'm willing to endure it. Gong Yimo really couldn't hold it in anymore. That wasn't just a cut. It was a piece of flesh that had been cut off. Seeing that frightening sunken wound, she really couldn't control herself anymore. Gong Yimo sobbed and scolded loudly. That bastard! How could he be so overboard? You're the person I love the most. Sob. My heart aches whenever you bump into something. How could you do such a thing to yourself? I allowed it. Sob, 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 sob. Gong Yimo said as she cried. Every word and sentence made Gong Dai happy and satisfied. But as his heart throbbed, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. What did she mean by his heart aching whenever he bumped into something? She was so adorable that it made his heart tremble. He really wanted to kiss the girl who was crying in his arms, kiss away all her tears, and stop her words that made people love and hate her at the same time. But he couldn't. He could only hug her, and in the end, a myriad of emotions converged into a smile. I don't regret it, because you're also the person I love the most. In an instant, Gong Yimo cried even louder. After that, Si Wuyin became much more well-behaved. He seriously concocted medicine for Gong Yimo. For the time being, they didn't find out that he had done anything wrong. As for Gong Dai, he was ordered by Gong Yimo to stay in bed and recuperate. He wasn't allowed to come out. On this day, Gong Yimo was looking through her storage space with some distress. She had the sacred Yurong powder to remove scars in her storage space, but its effect on regenerating muscles was average. It would be great if there was a sacred medicine that could regenerate muscles and bones. Gong Dai's cut on himself was too ruthless. If he had such a scar on his body, wouldn't his wife be frightened when he got married in the future? Gong Yimo subconsciously thought of Si Wuyin. That person really had countless good medicines on him. She was just afraid that he would tamper with them. Everything else was easy to deal with. How could she get something good from him? After thinking for a long time, she didn't have any ideas. She directly knocked on Si Wuyin's door. When Si Wuyin saw that it was her, he was a little surprised. After all, she wanted to strangle him to death before. and now she had the face to come knocking on his door. In terms of shamelessness, Gong Yimo was the first person he had ever seen. Gong Yimo giggled and asked, I just want to know when you, who is known as Gue Jian Cho, will be completely cured of the poison in your body. She acted coquettishly like a little girl, causing Si Wuyin to feel numb all over. Why would he feel numb? Gong Yimo was a girl to begin with. He kept feeling that something was wrong. Si Wuyin sat at the table and poured himself a cup of tea to calm himself down. Then he snorted coldly. Don't worry. With me here, you won't die. Gong Yimo also ran to his side and sat down. She said with a fawning expression, saving one is saving two is also saving. I can forgive you for what you did to Gong Dai before, but it's not too much for you to contribute some medicine, right? Si Wuyin raised his eyebrows and smiled. He said sinisterly, Aren't you afraid that I'll poison it? Gong Yimo shook her head. If you dare to poison it, I'll cut off your fingers one by one. What do you think? She said those words with a smile, causing Si Wuyin to feel a chill down his spine. He said sullenly, No. Gong Yimo raised her eyebrows. She suddenly raised her voice. No matter what, Yuqi's puppet emperor is still the son of Yuqi's empress dowager. She can't bear to give you such good things. Chapter 121. Her words made Si Wuyin's face turn green and pale. He glared at Gong Yimo angrily. She did not know which words had provoked him, but he looked extremely angry. I don't know what you're talking about. You don't know? Gong Yimo rubbed her chin. How about this? The weather is good today. Why don't we go out for a walk on a horse? Si Wuyin was still feeling annoyed, so she agreed without much thought when she heard this. Gong Yimo informed Zhenshi of Gojozian. Seeing that Gong Dai was resting, she was slightly relieved. Excessive blood loss would cause him to feel sleepy, but he should be fine after a few days. Gong Yimo rode a horse for herself, and then picked one for Si Wuyin. Unexpectedly, the horse became very uneasy when Si Wuyin approached it. If the waiter did not hold on to the reins tightly, it would have run away. Gong Yimo laughed. This horse is a war horse. It's a pity that after retiring, it contracted an illness that makes it unable to see blood. Your clothes are also red, so you should change into another one. As she spoke, she asked someone to bring over a gray robe that had been prepared. Si Wuyin narrowed his eyes. I like red, Gong Yimo said indifferently. That's fine, but I'm preparing to leave the city for a walk at the frontier. You're too eye-catching. If you're shot dead by Liu Ye's soldiers, I won't care. Si Wuyin noticed that Gu Shijio had changed into a khaki dress in such a short period of time. She knew that Gu Shijio was not faking it. Although she was reluctant, she still changed into the gray dress with a look of disgust. Only then did he safely get on the horse and steadily leave. Gong Yimo was amused when she saw his dusty appearance. She had long felt that a man wearing red was too flashy. A good-looking man should wear red to show off the color. The two of them left the city one after another and headed towards the Great Wall. Now that the weather was cold and it had snowed a few times, the wind was painful to the face. Gong Yimo did not mind, but Si Wuyin could not stand it and asked angrily, How did you guess my identity? Gong Yimo urged her horse to walk side by side with him. She smiled and said, If you can know my identity, why can't I know yours? After all, she was a dead person now. He choked and felt angry. Why did he always have to suffer in front of Gong Yimo? Gong Yimo looked at the snowy mountains in the distance. They were majestic and magnificent. Until now, those mountain peaks that were too high above sea level were still pure lands. No one had gone up there. On the ground, there was a mixture of gray, yellow, and white, extending into the distance as far as the eye could see, causing one's heart to become vast and open up. Gong Yimo took a deep breath. Si Wuyin followed Gong Yimo's gaze. He did not know why, but he also had the same feeling. But it was very strange. It was not his first time seeing the scenery beyond the Great Wall, but it was the first time he felt his heart open up. He couldn't help but look at the girl beside him. She was clearly wearing yellow clothes, but her snowy little face seemed to be glowing under the reflection of the snow. She had a smile on her face as she suddenly glanced over and asked in a soft voice, What made you want to kill me in Gong Dai? Si Wuyin was stunned. It took him a long time to react to what she said. He had a strange expression and slightly frowned. A trace of sadness flashed through his eyes. I don't know what you were talking about. You don't know? Gong Yimo smiled. You let Gong Dai bleed and cut his flesh. Isn't it because you can't get close to him? So you want to use me as an opportunity to let him slowly commit suicide? As long as he loses too much blood and loses his guard one day, you will kill him, right? Her words made Si Wuyan's face turn even uglier. As for me, if you didn't poison me to death, Gong Dai would not let you off. You would have done that long ago, right? Now, although I have woken up, the poison in my body has not been removed. Si Wuyan. Others may not know, but how can I not know? Your mother is the world's #1 poison expert. How can a mere scorpion poison harm you? Si Wuyan suddenly opened his mouth. Stop talking. His gloomy gaze fell on Gong Yimo, almost piercing through her. So what if I did it on purpose? So what if you found out? What can you do to me? He curled one corner of his mouth and laughed very fiercely and savagely. Scorpion poison is not difficult for me, but I am the only person in this place who can save you. If you want to force me, you can try. Gong Yimo burst into laughter. If you can be so ruthless to your mother, how can you be a puppet emperor? His face sank. Gong Yimo, don't think that I don't dare to kill you. Try provoking me again. Gong Yimo hurriedly stretched out her hands and made a gesture of surrender. Okay. I won't say any more. Hey, look at how obedient I am. You might as well give me the antidote. Look, I have already prepared a fast horse and a luggage for you. She conjured out a bottle of water and a simple luggage. Your identity has already been seen through by me. Why don't we make a deal? As long as you give me the antidote and leave behind a bottle of medicine that can regenerate muscles and bones, I promise that I will not reveal your secret to anyone. Hey, walk straight from here, and you will reach Luyi. You can go and harm the people there. Si Wuyan didn't know whether to laugh or cry at her words. What she said was right and the deal was reasonable, but why should he listen to her? You have prepared well. Unfortunately, if I give you the medicine, do you dare to eat it? I dare. Gong Yimo nodded. You did that to Gong Dai, but I didn't kill you. I know your identity and even let you go. With such kindness, it's not good for you to repay kindness with enmity, right? She raised her head and smiled innocently. Her smile was extremely pure, and her clear eyes looked at him without blinking. It made him feel as if he was being trusted. For so many years, people only looked at him with disgust or hatred or fear. No one had ever looked at him like this. It was as if she would support whatever he said and believe whatever he did. Unfortunately, he wasn't Gong Dai and didn't have such a close relative. Gong Yimo saw that he really took out a bottle from his sleeve, and her eyes lit up. I knew you would have a way. She happily took it. Si Wuyan snorted and laughed coldly. Aren't you afraid that it's poison? Gong Yimo was stunned. It can't be that bad. If you kill me, Gong Dai won't let you off. He won't even let your people off. It's been so long. Don't tell me you don't know my cute little brother's personality? Si Wuyan choked and glared at her fiercely. Gong Yimo didn't notice and smiled as she poured out the pill and swallowed it without hesitation. Her actions were clean and smooth without any hesitation. Seeing that she really ate it just like that, Si Wuyan was very surprised. His mouth was slightly open, as if he wanted to say something. She thought that he would take it back to test for poison, or at least test it with a needle. But she ate it just like that. She really trusted him. After Gong Yimo swallowed it, she only felt a cool gas rush down her body. The dull pain in her internal organs strangely disappeared. She beamed with joy, her eyes full of bright colors. Thank you. The cold wind whistled past. Si Wuyan tightened the reins in his hand with a miserable and indifferent expression. He looked at her and said a few words. If there's an afterlife, don't believe in people like me. Chapter 122. When Gong Yimo heard this, she suddenly felt a sharp pain in her heart. She couldn't bear it and spat out a mouthful of blood. Si Wuyan sneered as he looked at Gong Yimo's suddenly pale face. While he was laughing happily, his heart felt a slight pain. But without waiting for him to say anything, The horse under him suddenly neighed and charged forward crazily. The horse was frightened. Gong Yimo endured the sharp pain in her heart and wiped the blood from the side of her lips. She lowered her eyes and sighed softly. "Didn't I tell you? That horse is afraid of blood, ah." The wind whizzed past his ears. Si Wuyin crouched low on the horse's back as he tightly gripped the reins to prevent himself from being thrown off. Only then did he remember Gong Yimo's warning. He hated himself for lifting a rock and smashing his own foot. At this speed, if he was thrown off, even if he didn't die, he would be half dead. The surrounding scenery whizzed past, and he had to think of a way to get down. Otherwise, if he continued forward and met Liu Ye's soldiers, he would definitely be shot to death. But how was he going to get down? Si Wuyin's mind had countless ideas, but he rejected them one by one. His heart became more and more anxious as cold sweat seeped out of his forehead. Indeed, because he had committed too many sins, he would die a horrible death? In his panic, Si Wuyin's heart suddenly gave birth to this idea. His frightened heart suddenly felt a little tired. The wind whizzed past his face. He was a useless person. How was he going to get off the horse unscathed? Forget it. He didn't know who his Empress mother would appoint to replace him after he died. Only, he didn't know if that person would be as obedient and easy to control as him. Thinking of this, the hand that was tightly gripping the reins gradually loosened. But at this moment, a female voice was heard which made him feel refreshed. "Do you want to die so badly?" He frantically turned around. Indeed, it was Gong Yimo who had chased after him. The horse she was riding was obviously a rare and precious treasure. It was actually able to catch up with the frightened horse. But so what if she caught up with him? At this speed, he did not think that Gong Yimo could save him. In other words, it was too risky to save him. He did not think that Gong Yimo would do that. After all, he had wanted to kill her before. Gong Yimo caught up once again. Her face was pale, and it was obvious that she was enduring the pain. However, she was still smiling, as if everything was under her control. "Don't say I didn't give you a chance. I'll count to 3. If you jump down, I'll definitely catch you." Her words made Si Wuyin laugh. At such a fast speed, he would definitely die if he jumped down. How could he catch it? She probably didn't know that even if her martial arts skills were high, she had been hit by his heart-burning powder. Once she used her internal energy, it would be like 10,000 arrows piercing her heart. Even an adult wouldn't be able to endure it, let alone a girl like her. 1. Her calm voice touched Si Wuyin's heart. At this moment, he suddenly regretted poisoning her. 2. Anyway, if he kept running like this, he would die. Dying with 10,000 arrows piercing his heart was too undignified. If he fell to his death, Gong Yimo would at least collect his corpse. Gong Yimo smiled. "If you've heard about me, then you should know that I, Gong Yimo, never disappoint." Gong Yimo smiled. "You've heard about me before, but you should know that I, Gong Yimo, never disappoint." Her words were like a shot of adrenaline that suddenly woke Si Wuyin up. 3. He should not have let go. He was clearly afraid of death. But when Gong Yimo said the word 3, he actually unconsciously let go of his hand. He clenched his teeth and jumped down. Then, he crashed into a warm embrace. But he was after all a grown man. The huge impact and weight caused Gong Yimo to deviate. She hugged Si Wuyin and rolled several times on the ground before coming to a stop. During this time, she protected Si Wuyin's vital points. He did not touch any of the gravel and jumped down from the crazy horse without a single injury. He got up in a panic and no longer pressed down on Gong Yimo. His eyes were filled with panic like a little beast. But Gong Yimo's situation was not so good. Her face was cut by a stone, and there was not a single part of her body that wasn't in pain. She opened her mouth to curse, but spat out a mouthful of blood. Just now, when she used her internal energy, that feeling of 10,000 arrows piercing her heart. If it wasn't for the hellish pain in her past life, she would have lost her mind and Si Wuyin would have fallen to his death. But Si Wuyin, this bastard, did not warn her beforehand. He deserved to fall to his death. The sight of her vomiting blood pierced Si Wuyin's heart. He hurriedly touched his clothes and finally took out a pill to feed Gong Yimo with trembling hands. Gong Yimo smiled weakly and glanced at him. This time, there's no poison. Although she said that, she did not hesitate to take the pill in her mouth and swallowed it. Si Wuyin stood rooted to the ground in a daze. He didn't know if it was because of the shock or because of the warmth of her lips that came from his hand. He was in a daze and his brain seemed to have gone blank. He did not know what to do at all. Gong Yimo took the pill, closed her eyes and lay back down. She sighed. I'm so tired. I'm dying. She dragged her words and raised her head and winked. How was it? I wasn't wrong, right? Cough. I never disappoint anyone. She did not know why Si Wuyin's eyes turned red when he heard her words. He suddenly did not understand. What was all this for? Why did God let him meet Gong Yimo when he had already given up on humanity and lost all hope? If he had never met her, he might have continued to be twisted and believe that everything he did was right. His thoughts and actions were all correct. It was only natural that he would become like this. Rather than saying that he was wrong, it was better to say that the entire world was wrong. But after meeting her, it was as if all his past theories had been overturned. It was as if all his past thoughts were wrong, extreme, and narrow-minded. Being extreme was also a disguise for his own weakness and incompetence. There was actually someone like her in this world. No matter how others treated her, she would always act according to her heart. Even if she suffered, she would still be able to face life with a smile. But he had retreated from the beginning and became dark. His actions were actually worse than a woman's. Seeing that he did not speak for a long time, Gong Yimo took a deep breath and asked a little puzzledly, May I ask, why did you feed me poison just now? They were clearly chatting well and the atmosphere was harmonious. At least that was what she thought. Si Wuyin knelt on the ground and lowered his head. After a long time, he said, People like you should not exist in this world. This world was obviously dirty and twisted. It did not need light at all. Gong Yimo was stunned. Without waiting for her to say anything, he suddenly looked up at Gong Yimo and said seriously and slowly, I'm jealous that Gong Dai has such a good family like you. I don't, so he doesn't deserve to have you. Chapter 123. Gong Yimo was convinced. Was this a personality disorder? Forget it. Let's not care about him. Hey, I saved you. Shouldn't you give me some reward? She had a treacherous smile on her face. Si Wuyin looked at her mischievous smile even though she was in a sorry state. He did not know why his heart, which was originally surging with anger, calmed down. He did not hate her. Instead, he wanted to laugh. What do you want? He thought that Gong Yimo would ask him to immediately cure the scorpion poison in her body. Who knew that Gong Yimo would say, If I can only make one request, I want the elixir on your body that can regenerate muscles and bones. Her expression gradually turned serious. When Si Wuyin heard this, his expression gradually turned cold. He looked deeply at Gong Yimo, as if he wanted to see something from her small face. But in the end, he did not say anything. He still took out a jade box from his bosom. What is this? Si Wuyin said in a low voice, This is the muscle revitalizing ointment that Imperial Mother personally concocted. It can revive the dead and regenerate flesh and bones. Gong Yimo's eyes lit up when she heard this. She hurriedly opened the box. The sparkling ointment exuded a kind of intoxicating smell. Just as Si Wuyin was about to get up, Gong Yimo suddenly used her hand to pick up a bit and smeared it on her injured face. Si Wuyin wanted to stop her, but it was too late. Once the ointment touched the wound, the bleeding immediately stopped, but a faint green color appeared. Are you crazy? Si Wuyin snatched the box back and somewhat panicked as he searched for something on his body. Gong Yimo was a little amused. Just how many things was this person hiding on his body? But this smile became fainter and fainter. Looking at his panic and the faint numbness on his face, she sighed softly. If you want others to trust you, first of all, you have to be worthy of their trust. Si Wuyin's hand paused. He glanced at her. His eyes were full of shock and somewhat evasive. Gong Yimo sat up and knelt on the ground. She stroked his head strenuously with a gentle expression. If you want people to care about you, you have to pay a price first. This is human nature. Perhaps people are selfish and cunning, but how many people are insatiably greedy? If you can only see the ugliness of human nature, then it will show you even more ugliness. But if you can see kindness, you will also discover how kind people can be. It was as if he was walking in a pitch-black night. His entire body was covered in scars from all the bumps and bruises. However, someone suddenly pushed open a window in front of him. What shone in was the sunlight that he longed for and was afraid to face. Si Wuyin didn't know how to describe his feelings at that moment. Not only was he shocked, but he also didn't know what to do. He could only find some medicine with a cold expression and apply it on her face. This time, the medicine he took out was placed in a wooden box. When he touched his face, he actually felt a pulling sensation. It was amazing. This must be the muscle revitalizing ointment. Si Wuyin hadn't finished applying it when Gong Yimo snatched it from his hands. She smiled evilly. This must be the muscle revitalizing ointment, right? She simply wanted to praise herself for being quick-witted. Si Wuyin looked at her with a complicated expression. He looked deeply at her and didn't say anything. In the end, he got up and prepared to leave. Where are you going? He looked down at a certain girl who didn't care about her image at all. Do you think the scorpion poison in your body is easy to get rid of? I don't have any suitable medicine on me. I have to go back and make another one. Gong Yimo smiled. After whistling, the horse she was sitting on just now galloped back. She pinched her sore muscles and looked at the wooden box in her hands. She couldn't help but think, sigh, it really wasn't easy to trick him into giving her a box of medicine. When they returned to the city, Gong Dai was actually awake. Moreover, he had been waiting for her at the city gate with a cold expression. When he saw Gong Yimo, Gong Dai didn't even have time to smile before he was frightened by her sorry state. He glared fiercely at Si Wuyin, who was sitting behind the horse. That gaze could almost kill. Gong Yimo was very happy to see Gong Dai. She jumped off the horse and ran in front of Gong Dai. She was a little worried. Do you still feel dizzy? Why did you suddenly run out? Gong Dai smiled at her, then took off his coat and draped it over Gong Yimo's body. It's so cold now. Why didn't you wear more when you went out? Gong Yimo smiled a little embarrassedly. Gong Dai cleaned the dried grass on her head with a helpless expression. Royal sister is a big girl now. Where did you roll around? Gong Yimo was too embarrassed to say that it wasn't just one round. She had rolled around more than 10 times. She pulled on his sleeve and acted coquettishly. Let's go back quickly. I'm so hungry. Gong Dai saw that she had purposely skipped this question. He looked at her helplessly. All right, let's go home. But when he turned around, his dark jade-like eyes coldly glanced at Si Wuyin, who was still sitting on the horse behind him. If this person wasn't still useful, he would have cut him into pieces. Si Wuyin was 10 years older than Gong Dai. He replied with a cold smile. He knew that as long as Gong Yimo was around, Gong Dai wouldn't dare to do anything to him. He was fearless. During dinner, Gong Yimo met Jinshi of Gojoseon and his family for the first time. She was a little embarrassed. After all this time, she had troubled them so much but didn't have the chance to have a proper gathering. Jinshi of Gojoseon was already in his 50s. He had a son named Li Changfeng, a daughter-in-law named Li Zhangshi, 2 grandsons, and a granddaughter. Then there was his princess consort, Li Ru. His family members weren't complicated at all, so it was easy to interact with them. However, Gong Yimo was very absent-minded throughout the meal. When the princess consort finally held her hand and finished nagging, Gong Yimo quickly took Gong Dai back to their room. Jinshi of Gojoseon couldn't stop smiling when he saw that the 2 children had a good relationship. However, he was a man after all, so he was careless. On the contrary, the princess consort was a little worried. These 2 children have a good relationship. She frowned slightly. After all, she was a lady from a noble family, so she still didn't agree. It's just that the princess and his highness aren't young anymore. If they stay in the same room from time to time, I'm afraid it will affect their reputation. Jinshi of Gojoseon said loudly, What are you afraid of? Although they aren't biological siblings from the same mother, they have relied on each other for so many years. They are almost as close as real siblings. I'll see who dares to talk nonsense. The princess consort opened her mouth, but didn't say anything in the end. His highness was a man, so he was too careless. When she thought about how his highness reacted when the princess was in danger, it was reasonable to say that they had a deep relationship. However, it was just a meal just now. The princess wanted to eat fish, but His Highness had already removed the fish bones. Before she finished eating, His Highness scooped some soup to cool it down. Just as she finished drinking the soup, His Highness handed her a handkerchief. This really didn't seem like something her younger brother would do. It was more like... She paused and didn't dare to think too deeply about it. Gong Dai allowed Gong Yimo to pull him along. Looking at her lively appearance of being able to eat and jump, it was as if they had returned to a few years ago. However, the difference was that back then, they were in the palace and had to be careful with every step. Now that they were out, no one could control how they interacted with each other. Chapter 124. Royal Sister, what are you doing? Seeing Gong Yimo mysteriously close the door, Gong Dai was a bit nervous and couldn't help but ask. Gong Yimo hurriedly took out the muscle-revitalizing ointment that she had swindled from Si Wu Yan, her eyes sparkling. Dang, 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 dang. Do you see this? Do you know what this is? This is the muscle-revitalizing ointment personally made by the world's most powerful poison master. It can revive the dead and regrow flesh and bones. I spent a lot of effort to get it. Gong Dai had never heard of any sacred medicine with this name, but since Gong Yimo said it was good, then it was naturally good stuff. That's great, Royal Sister. The injury on your shoulder hasn't healed yet. Let me apply the ointment for you. Gong Yimo stared blankly for a moment, then immediately laughed. I have enough Yurong powder on me. It's just a small injury. I prepared it for you. She revealed a wicked smile. Quickly take off your pants and let big sister pamper you. The ambiguity in her words made Gong Dai's jade face turn red. If his confidants knew, they would probably be shocked again. Why was His Highness so different in front of the princess and in front of them? His heart was so tired. Reincarnation was indeed a skill. Seeing Gong Dai stunned and even blushing, Gong Yimo couldn't help but laugh. How did she raise this child to have such a shy and bashful appearance? Unfortunately, she didn't know that the child she was talking about was only like this in front of her. Gong Yimo saw that he wasn't moving, so she could only do it herself. She pushed Gong Dai to sit on the couch. Of course, she couldn't really take off his pants. Instead, she sat on the foot of the bed and carefully pulled up the top of his pants. She was awake, and this was the first time she took the initiative. This knowledge made Gong Dai's face turn red and his heart beat faster. He sat on the bed and looked at Gong Dai, who was crawling by his feet. He felt her carefully examining the wound and her warm breath on his leg. A sense of satisfaction arose spontaneously. Lowering his head to look at her long hair, his heart seemed to be slightly stirred by the ends of her hair. Itchy, but he didn't know where the itch came from. Thirsty, he didn't know what he was thirsting for. Gong Yimo carefully applied ointment to him. Her eyes were full of heartache. Why did she feel that she was always applying ointment to Gong Dai? She was so useless that she couldn't even take care of a child. Gong Yimo suddenly said seriously as she traced the shocking scar with her fingertips. I will remember that this place once lost a piece of flesh because of me. Gong Dai couldn't help but reach out to stroke her hair. His eyes filled with endless gentleness as he whispered, You don't have to remember this, because everything I have is yours. That night, it was snowing lightly. There was no sound at all. A knock on the door woke Gong Yimo up. She opened her eyes in a daze and opened the door. To her surprise, it was Si Wu Yan. It's so late. Why aren't you sleeping? Why are you scaring people? Dressed in red with disheveled hair in the middle of the night, she really didn't understand beauty. His expression was a little cold as he shook the 2 jugs of wine in his hand and said, Going for a drink? Gong Yimo knew that he had something to say, so she pulled a thick cloak over her body and laughed. What are you waiting for? Let's go. Gong Yimo originally thought that he would find a beautiful pavilion to sit down and chat about the weather. Who knew that he would bring Gong Yimo directly to the market, because there were often spies from enemy countries in the Western continent. Once they were caught, they would be executed here. So many people had died here in the past 10 years. There were stains on the execution platform that couldn't be wiped off. Moreover, these 2 lunatics were not sleeping at night and were drinking in this ghostly place in the snow. Gong Yimo wondered if she could leave first. Si Wuyin gave her a jug of wine and one for himself. She didn't know where he found it, but it tasted pretty good. He didn't speak and just drank sullenly, as if he had something on his mind. Gong Yimo couldn't help but recall that she seemed to have heard someone say that there was an unidentified flying pigeon in the afternoon. They asked her if she wanted to shoot it down. She guessed that it was looking for the plague in front of her, but she refused. As expected, he came to drink with her at night. "You, how did you know my identity?" he suddenly asked. Just as Gong Yimo was racking her brains to think of an excuse to get away with it, he smiled weakly. "It's okay. Anyway, it's not a glorious identity." Gong Yimo didn't know how to respond. In her previous life, when her metal horse stepped into Yuchi, she discovered that this seemingly powerful country was internally divided. There was only one reason. This was a country where women were in power. Before she came, there were already a few revolts in Yuchi. Even when she fought her way to their doorstep, she didn't meet any decent resistance. In the end, the leader of Yuchi's largest rebel army, the original General Yuchi, directly handed her a letter of surrender. Thus, she easily fought her way to the Yuchi royal city. Along the way, she heard many rumors about Empress Dowager Yuchi, which was really shocking. Not only did this Empress Dowager poison the emperor to death, she also killed many of the emperor's sons. Later, she appointed her own son as the emperor. In the end, her son was impatient with her interference in politics and wanted to rebel. Many people supported him, but when someone leaked the information, she used bloody means to suppress it. After killing her own son, she appointed another son as the emperor. However, this son was more pitiful. He wasn't the Empress Dowager's biological son, but a prince raised under her name. Although he was taught by his adoptive mother and was said to be skilled in both medicine and poison, in order to prevent him from rebelling, the Empress Dowager crippled his meridians, causing his body to be weak and powerless for the rest of his life. Furthermore, the adopted son was extremely beautiful and was her pet boy. From this, one could see how pitiful this puppet emperor was. He was raised by the Empress Dowager and was her pet boy. The court officials were wary of him, and the common people despised him. He didn't want to be manipulated by the Empress Dowager, but no one would help him, because they were afraid that this was a ploy by the Empress Dowager to test him. Gong Yimo admired this Empress Dowager very much and sympathized with this emperor. When the army broke into the Yuchi royal city, the Empress Dowager had already escaped with her trusted aides. The entire palace was emptied by the fleeing palace servants. Some even deliberately set fire to the palace, causing smoke and dust to fill the air. However, no one dared to approach the palace in the middle. Even if they wanted to burn this palace the most, and it clearly contained the most treasures, they only dared to stay far away from it. That palace was the Empress Dowager's secret dragon palace. Haha, a mere Empress Dowager actually lived in the secret dragon palace. When Gong Yimo stepped in, the palace was extremely intact. Pearls and agates could be seen everywhere, and they were called antiques. It was a completely different world from the mess outside. That was also the first and last time she saw Si Wuyin. Si Wuyin was dressed in bright red, sitting on the steps without a care for his image. He leaned over, his face exquisite as he drank mouthful after mouthful of wine. He didn't attack her, such as poisoning her. Chapter 126. Previously, the poison in the wine just happened to counter the scorpion poison in her body. It was fighting poison with poison, which was why it was so painful. What he fed her at the end was probably the poison cleansing pill that cleared away the remaining poison. At this moment, the inner energy in her body was flowing smoothly without any obstruction. From this, it could be seen that the medicine in his hands was indeed very good. However, she did not want to see this kind of unpredictable person again. All right? After lying down for a long time, someone suddenly walked to Gong Yimo's side. She raised her head and saw that it was actually Gong Dai. At this moment, he was wearing a black robe that almost blended into the night. Snowflakes floated on his body and landed on his slightly cold brows, making him look so desolate. "Why are you here?" She struggled to prop herself up. When Gong Dai saw this, he hurriedly stepped forward to help her up. He smiled faintly like a snow fairy, which was extremely moving. "Royal sister, are you all right? Gong Yimo nodded. I should be all right, but I'm a little tired. Only then did Gong Dai relax and directly carried Gong Yimo up by the waist. Gong Yimo was startled and then gradually relaxed. She just did not expect that her little brother had already grown into a handsome young man and could easily carry her like this. It did not feel strange anymore. Gong Dai indeed grew very quickly. He was handsome and tall, while Gong Yimo's height stopped at 1.68 meters. However, she was on the skinny side. Nestled in Gong Dai's arms like this, she really felt like a little bird that was dependent on him. Gong Yimo was indeed tired. She obediently laid in Gong Dai's arms until he carried her back and placed her on the warm bed. It was unknown who was so attentive, but the bed was warm. At a glance, it was obvious that someone had used a heater to warm it. Gong Yimo burrowed into the bed as soon as she touched it. Her lazy appearance made her look like a cat. Seeing her like this, even Gong Dai's brows were gentle. He also wanted to crawl under Gong Yimo's quilt, but he couldn't do that. He could only endure it and tuck her in. Gong Yimo was originally going to sleep. She was feeling unwell and very tired, but she suddenly thought of something. She grabbed Gong Dai's hand, slightly propped up her eyes, and asked carefully, how did you know I was at the market today? Following me? She didn't say the last few words. The smile on Gong Dai's face froze for a moment before he smiled again. Someone said that you went out with him. I was worried, so I came out to take a look. Gong Yimo nodded, but her expression was still very conflicted. She seemed to have something to say, but she didn't know how to say it. Of course, she knew that under the support of Junshi of Gojoseon, Gong Dai had trained many people, but it couldn't be what she was thinking. Seeing her frown, Gong Dai couldn't bear to see her frown. Royal sister, if you have something to say, just say it. He was always like this. In front of Gong Yimo, he would always be a well-behaved and good-tempered young man. Gong Yimo then smiled embarrassedly. That, you didn't send anyone to kill him, right? Her words made Gong Dai slightly stiffen. He looked at Gong Yimo with a deep gaze. He had disguised himself so well, so how could Royal Sister still guess what he would do? Gong Yimo immediately sat up when she saw his expression. Gong Dai must have sent people to kill Si Wuyan. She became anxious. Si Wuyan didn't have the strength to truss up a chicken, but if he really resisted, with his poison skills, wouldn't the people that Gong Dai had trained with great difficulty lose a lot? Can you let him go? Gong Yimo saw that Gong Dai was speaking very quickly, but Gong Dai didn't say anything. He only looked deeply at Gong Yimo. His expression was complicated and deep. After a long time, he finally smiled. However, this smile wasn't as obedient and gentle as usual. Instead, it was a little strange. In an instant, the aura around him changed completely. His appearance didn't change, but the feeling that he gave off was different. His eyes narrowed slightly, and the corners of his mouth lifted slightly. His eyes overflowed with an extremely dangerous light, causing the temperature in the room to drop immediately. You want me to let him go? His deep voice rubbed against Gong Yimo's ears. It was a rhetorical question, but it sent chills down her spine. Gong Yimo was stunned. She had never seen Gong Dai like this, but for some reason, when he smiled and asked her that question, even though his face was still young, it reminded Gong Yimo of Gong Dai's appearance when he was 30 years old in her previous life. At that time, he also smiled like this and broke her fingers one by one. The memory that had been sealed away for a long time made Gong Yimo tremble. She looked at Gong Dai cautiously. She suddenly thought, so what if I raised him single-handedly? He's still that cold and heartless Gong Dai in his bones. If I suddenly asked him to let go of the prey that once threatened me, would Gong Dai retaliate? At the thought of retaliation, she couldn't help but recall the tragic death in her previous life. After so many years, she thought that she had already forgotten about it. She didn't expect that she could still remember it so clearly. The torture that was inflicted on her body and his cold and smiling face gradually overlapped with the Gong Dai in front of her. She slightly dodged and shrank back in fear. This instantly triggered Gong Dai's already furious heart. It was fine that she pleaded for mercy for someone who had hurt her, but now, she actually dared to be afraid of him? He approached her step by step. Gong Yimo originally wanted to retreat, but she held it in. She only opened her eyes wide and looked at him cautiously. Her heart suddenly started to pound. Her behavior simply made Gong Dai burn with anger. She was actually afraid of him? She was actually afraid of him? He knelt on the couch with one leg, leaned forward, and approached her. That cold gaze and that smile that contained anger seemed to be exactly the same as the god of death in her memory, but it also seemed to be different. But Gong Yimo didn't have time to distinguish. Layers of coldness swept over her, making her tremble all over. But she still held her breath and spoke softly. That person, he is also very pitiful, and he is still useful to me. Useful? But he hurt you, Gong Dai said with a smile, but his gaze was fixed on Gong Yimo. He was so close that Gong Yimo found it difficult to breathe. The space seemed to have narrowed down. She wanted to escape from Gong Dai's encirclement. As though he had sensed her intentions, Gong Dai used both his hands to support himself on both sides of her body, locking her firmly onto the bed. Gong Yimo finally panicked. She didn't know why Gong Dai, who had always been obedient, would suddenly become a different person. At that moment, Gong Yimo was lying beneath him. Their breathing intertwined, causing Gong Dai's heart to be in a mess. That evasive gaze made him want to ravage her crazily. But his heart was burning with anger. Everyone could be afraid of him, but why? How could the person he treasured be afraid of him? She was bullied like that, but she didn't allow him to kill that person. Why? Gong Dai's fingertips gently touched Gong Yimo's cheek. She trembled and didn't know what to do. Her subconscious action made Gong Dai even angrier. He raised his eyebrows and smiled coldly. Are you afraid of me? Chapter 127. He felt as if he had said a joke and laughed coldly. Then, he moved closer to her and looked at her with a gentle yet dangerous gaze. Why would you be afraid of me? I'm your most obedient brother. Gong Yimo took a breather from the tense atmosphere and looked at him seriously. If you're really obedient, then let me go and give the order to let him go. Gong Dai's eyes turned red when he heard that. Suddenly, he reached out and pinched Gong Yimo's face. His actions gave Gong Yimo a fright. She saw him tilting his head slightly and looking at her with a strange smile. Heh, who is he to you? Is he worth you pleading for him again and again? That light tone made the hair on Gong Yimo's back stand up, but when she reacted, she was angered by his actions. Her face turned cold and she said sternly, Gong Dai, you better let me go. It had been a long time since he heard her call him by his name. Hearing it from her mouth, Gong Dai felt satisfied. No, you haven't answered me yet. He was extremely tough and did not allow her to refuse to suppress Gong Yimo. This kind of him really made her afraid. Gong Yimo pushed him and realized that he did not move at all. Unknowingly, Gong Dai's martial arts skills had already surpassed hers. Gong Dai's eyes were smiling, but his gaze was very dark as it swept across her body. That gaze seemed to have a penetrating power as it scraped across her body. Tell me, why did you let him go? Why did you help him? Him too, Gong Che too. For the past year, why did you help Gong Che? The more he said, the more he could not maintain his smile. His voice suddenly rose, and there was anger in it as he questioned her. It turned out that this jealousy had been brewing in his heart for a long time. Every time he heard that she had done something for Gong Che, he wanted to kill her, especially when they returned from the desolate Miasma Plains. When Gong Yimo was unconscious, he heard how Gong Yimo was forced, how she sacrificed herself for Gong Che, and how she faked her death to escape. He only felt like his heart was being burned in a pot of oil. He wanted to wake her up and ask her what Gong Che did to deserve this. He also wanted to rush to the capital and kill all those people. But when he saw her injured and unconscious, Gong Dai held back. He did not even mention it when she woke up. He thought he could hold it in, but he could not hold it in at all. Gong Yimo was his. She was his. No one else could touch her, not even the crown prince. Gong Yimo seemed to be panicking as she stared at him blankly. Once again, he sneered. Tell me, why did you help him? Do you like him? Gong Dai. Gong Yimo suddenly shouted. Just when Gong Dai thought she would angrily resist and prepared an excuse, she suddenly cried. Her large eyes were filled with tears, but she fiercely glared at him and refused to let the tears fall. As soon as she cried, Gong Ju's boiling emotions seemed to have hit the pause button and disappeared. He blinked his eyes, suddenly at a loss of what to do. Gong Yimo's large eyes fiercely glared at Gong Dai with accusation. She pursed her lips and after a while, she could not stop crying and cursing. You have no conscience. Bastard. I instigated the crown prince to build the canal. It's true that I helped him, but I did it for you. She angrily wiped her tears with the back of her hand and angrily refused to look at him. I just want you to have more money in the future. I want to open our family shops all over the country. Otherwise, do you think I lack money? If I lived alone and did not have to think about you, I would be living a carefree life. Why do I have to keep Si Wuyan alive? He is Yu Qi's puppet emperor. I am helping him today so that the trade between the four countries can have a good start in the future. He will be a good emperor for the country and the people. He will do his best to facilitate this. Didn't you say that you want to travel around in the future? The national defense is so strict now. How can that be possible? Once the four countries have trade relations, we will be able to travel around. But not only do you not believe me, you even question me. The more she said, the angrier she became. She only felt that she had raised an ingrate. In her previous life, he had tortured her to death, but she did not take revenge. Instead, she repaid evil with good. But he treated her like this? The more she thought about it, the more wronged she felt. Finally, her tears fell like a broken string of pearls. It's fine if you question me, but you were fierce to me. Woo woo woo. Those tears were so hot that it seemed to burn his heart. Gong Dai quickly reached out to wipe them away. This time, it was like a flood breaking through a dam. Gong Yimo turned around, and with her back facing him, she laid on the bed and started to cry. This time, Gong Dai was completely flustered. Whether it was his previous coldness, dominance, or ruthlessness, they all disappeared. He had turned back into that clean, cold, and ignorant youth. His heart was in a mess, and he did not know what to do with the person he loved. Don't cry. I'm sorry, royal sister. It's my fault. Get out. I don't want to see you anymore. Go away. Woo woo woo. When she said that she did not want to see him anymore, he knew that she was saying it out of anger. However, Gong Dai could not help but feel a pain in his heart. His hands clenched into fists. I will send someone to call someone back now. Gong Yimo ignored him and continued to cry. Gong Dai had no choice but to make a hand gesture. Immediately, a person appeared and knelt on the ground. This person was specially trained by Jinshi of Gojoseon. Later on, he was sent to Gong Dai. He had been with him for the longest time. Now that he saw the princess crying, he did not dare to raise his head. He only lowered his head and waited for orders. Seeing that Gong Yimo was not embarrassed at all and continued to cry in the presence of outsiders, Gong Dai's heart ached and he sighed. Then, he stared coldly at him and ordered in a cold voice, "Call back the person you sent out. Go now." At the end of his sentence, there was a hint of helplessness in his tone. When the person heard this, he hurriedly left. Gong Dai turned his head and saw Gong Yimo's shrugging shoulders. He frowned awkwardly and leaned over to softly fawn on her. "Royal sister, I've already done as you said. Please don't cry, okay?" He said it pitifully. His cold voice carried the unique grievance of a youth. Why was it that he was the one who was angry at the beginning, the one who was full of grievances, jealousy, and tolerance? But when Gong Yimo started crying, he had no way to fight back and could only give in. Although he thought this way, Gong Dai was still very willing to coax her. He was not impatient at all. Moreover, he patted her back and said some pleasing words at the same time. There was a hint of sweetness in his heart. Siblings would not be like this. They were like husband and wife when grandpa and grandma quarreled. Gong Dai patiently coaxed Gong Yimo for a long time. Only then did she raise her head while sobbing. Her eyes were red like a little rabbit's. She looked at him pitifully and asked, "Then will you still be fierce to me in the future?" "I won't. I swear." How could he? She was his precious baby. He could not love her enough. Gong Yimo blinked. There were still tears in her eyes. She pouted and said proudly, "Then you can't not trust me in the future. No matter what I do, you have to understand and support me unconditionally." Her small appearance made Gong Ju want to hug her and kiss her red eyes. "I promise you. I promise you. I'll listen to you." Gong Dai was very close to her. In the end, he shamelessly started to act cute. "Royal sister, don't be angry with me. Don't ignore me." Chapter 128. He was simply too adorable when he acted cute. Gong Yimo couldn't help but want to laugh. She couldn't even hold it in. After a while, she managed to hold it in and protect the royal sister's authority. She snorted coldly and pouted. "If there's a next time, I'll really ignore you. There won't be a next time, I swear." Seeing Gong Dai's serious expression and his handsome face tints, Gong Yimo couldn't help but laugh. Although there were still tears in her eyes, Gong Dai was smart enough not to mention this. The two of them made up again. This quarrel really came and went quickly. When Gong Dai came out of Gong Yimo's room, he was slightly relieved. He didn't know why he couldn't control himself just now and showed that side of himself to the royal sister. He clearly had always controlled himself very well, but now he seemed to have lost control, especially when he saw the royal sister being nice to others. He couldn't help it. It was already so late. Gong Dai didn't expect that the old princess consort was still awake. When she saw him come out, she faintly leaned against the door and looked at him. In order to hide Gong Yimo's identity, she had always said to others that she was the niece of the old princess consort's maternal family, so she was staying in her wing. Gong Dai was slightly stunned and smiled. "Grandmother, it's so late. Why aren't you sleeping?" Princess Consort Li Rushi forced a smile and glanced at Gong Yimo's room. "I'm old and sleepless. When I heard some noise, I came out to take a look." Gong Dai saw that she didn't have a servant girl by her side, so he naturally wouldn't expose her lie. He smiled faintly and said, "Grandmother, do you have something to say to me?" The princess consort hesitated for a while before nodding. "The snow tonight is beautiful. Your Highness wouldn't mind accompanying this old one for a walk in the plum garden behind the courtyard, right?" Gong Dai narrowed his eyes and sized her up. He smiled faintly. "Allow grandson to get an umbrella." Wang Fei nodded. She looked at Gong Dai's back as he calmly left and sighed. After Gong Dai ordered someone to guard Gong Yimo, he took out an umbrella. His intuition told him that what his grandmother wanted to say could not be heard by Gong Yimo, so he asked someone to guard her. Grandmother and granddaughter walked quietly like this. All the way to the plum garden, Wang Fei did not speak. Or rather, she was deep in thought about what to say. She looked at her grandson, who was already much taller than her. On one hand, she was amazed by how outstanding he was. If her daughter was in heaven and saw such an outstanding son, she would be very gratified. But on the other hand, he was worried. She had long heard that her grandson was raised single-handedly by the princess. However, the princess had never been a mother and was the same age as His Highness. In the end, there were still some things that she had not noticed. "What plans does your Highness have for the future?" She opened her mouth and asked a seemingly unrelated question. Gong Dai smiled. "Back to the capital." Wang Fei was slightly surprised. "You're coming back?" Gong Ju shook his head. "I'm afraid she won't be back for a while. I've made a meritorious service, and now I'm back alive. Previously, I was delayed because of Sister Gong's injury. Now that she's recovered, I think she'll return to the capital soon." In fact, Gong Dai's original plan was to return to the capital after reporting on the completion of the mission. But Gong Yimo's injury changed his mind once again. Wang Fei thought for a while. Her face was tense, revealing the wrinkles at the side of her mouth. "In that case, why don't we let the princess stay in the West Province?" As soon as her words fell, Gong Ju's eyes turned to look at her, causing the rest of her words to be stuck in her throat. Seeing that he seemed to have frightened her, Gong Dai smiled again, but his smile was full of determination. "Wherever I am, she will be there." His words caused the woman to stop. She stood in the snow with a grave expression. "In a few days, your Highness will be 13 years old, right?" Gong Dai nodded. He hated himself for growing up too slowly. Wang Fei paused, looked at him, and asked softly, "Then does your highness know that Dai Yu State's ancient teachings say that when a man is 13 years old, he has to find a woman from an official's family and get married at 15? The smile on Gong Dai's face froze for a moment. He carefully looked at his grandmother, who had a grave expression on her face, and his heart trembled. That requires a mother. Gong Dai smiled bitterly. Moreover, it's not always like that. The crown prince is almost 18 years old now. Thinking of the crown prince's awkward situation, Wang Fei shook her head. His highness was delayed before, but this time, the merit of building the canal is enough to secure his position in the Eastern Palace. Now that Her Majesty has been released, it won't be long before the crown prince gets married, and your highness. She was a little embarrassed, but she still said it. Now that your mother has passed away, this old bag of bones must find a woman for you. I wonder what kind of woman your highness likes. What kind of woman does he like? Gong Dai immediately thought of Gong Yimo's various quick-witted looks and smiled slowly. Grandmother, you don't have to worry. A man's ambition is to travel far. Now that I'm not settled, I don't dare to marry someone else. Not only did Wang Fei's words not comfort her, but she also frowned and said seriously, Your Highness must have read a lot of books and have a long-term vision. You don't care about these mundane things. Unfortunately, your grandmother's vision is shallow. I only read the necessary ethics, the book of poetry, the 3 principles, the 5 virtues, and the precepts for women. Her words were very clear. So, Your Highness, please go ahead with your career. Let this old one worry about the trivial matters of the inner courtyard for you. Did she already see through his love for Gong Yimo? Was this a violation of the moral code? Was this a violation of basic ethics? Gong Dai narrowed his eyes. The coldness in his eyes was colder than the snowflakes. Wang Fei felt extremely uncomfortable under his gaze. She was even a little scared, but she still stood there resolutely. Was it against morals? Unfortunately, what to do? It was too late. Gong Dai smiled bitterly and shook his head. He retracted his cold aura and looked up at the sky. At this moment, he was dressed in black and stood in the snow. Beside him were plum blossoms. He really looked like a handsome young man who stood aloof from the world. Seeing that he didn't speak, Wang Fei was nervous, but she didn't dare to rush him. Grandmother, do you know what books I read when I was enlightened? After a long time, he finally spoke. Wang Fei frowned. She didn't really want to discuss books with him. After thinking for a while, she still replied. But, the 1,000-character classic? Wisdom and Wisdom? Gong Dai couldn't help but laugh and shake his head. His royal sister didn't read those things. Not only did she not read those, she didn't even read the precepts for women, and the analects of women. She did read them, but they were all relatively obscure books. He looked behind Wang Fei and seemed to be able to see the lively girl sleeping soundly. The corners of his mouth curled up again. The inadvertent gentleness in his eyes was enough to melt the winter snow. The first book I read was the Book of Changes. It was profound and difficult to understand, but royal sister didn't know. She even helped me find some books that she thought were useful for me to learn by myself. If I didn't know the words, I would ask her. She didn't know how to teach children. Later on, she always said that it was all thanks to my talent and intelligence. Speaking of this, he smiled faintly. His eyes were cold, but for some reason, they made people feel sweet. Later on, I read a lot of books, including Han Fizi, Zhou Yu, Xuanjing, Etiquette, and so on. His eyes suddenly locked onto the princess consort. That sudden look in his eyes was so sharp that it made the 50-something-year-old princess consort's heart tremble. So, when I started to learn about ethics and saw Changtong, I was already 11. But at that time, his smile was like a blooming plum blossom. But at that time, it was already too late. Chapter 129. Ignoring the princess consort's shock, he stretched out his hand and a secret guard stepped forward and knelt at his feet. It's late. Help me send grandmother back to her room to rest. Yes. But the princess consort came back to her senses and her eyes widened. Her eyes were filled with disapproval. Her mouth opened and closed. Looking at her outstanding and cold grandson, She was speechless for a few times. Princess consort, please. The man in black carried out Gong Dai's instructions meticulously. Gong Dai also looked at her with a smile, but it did not reach his eyes. He looked a little cold as he bowed. It's getting late. I'll take my leave now. Grandmother, have a good rest. Then he turned and left. His black robe blended into the night as if it could not be dispelled. But she is your royal sister. Finally, the princess consort said it with great effort. After saying it, her face turned pale as if she could not believe it herself. She was born in a prestigious family and had read books since she was young. Her daughter was also well-educated and well-behaved. She thought that she had seen and experienced many things over the years, but she could not help but be shocked at this moment. The young man's leaving figure paused slightly. He tilted his head but did not turn around. From afar, it sounded like he was laughing and his voice was very joyful. But I know she's royal sister. He turned around and continued walking. His eyes were as charming as a demon and his laughter was even louder in the wind. But, so what if she's royal sister? The princess consort's legs went weak and she almost fainted. The next day, Gong Dai bid farewell to Zhenshi of Gojoseon. After hearing his wife's words, Zhenshi of Gojoseon had a lot to say to Gong Dai. But Gong Dai was right. He had to return to the imperial city as soon as possible and could not delay any longer. Looking at the princess sitting by the side, he could not bring himself to say those words. Gong Dai was certain that even if they knew, they would not dare to speak carelessly. Therefore, Zhenshi of Gojoseon forced a smile and said, "In that case, I'll get the servants to prepare the caravan as soon as possible. We'll set off in the afternoon." Gong Dai bowed. "Thank you, grandfather." After the others left, Gong Yimo stuffed a pastry into her mouth and asked softly, "I think His Highness is right. As a dead person, I might as well stay here. Didn't you say that you want to stay here with me? Then you can find an excuse to come back after you return to the capital." It was originally like this. Gong Dai sat beside her, looked at her, and smiled faintly. His face became more and more handsome, and his smile was as beautiful as a snowflake blooming. "But I've changed my mind. Instead of hiding here, why don't we take advantage of the chaos in the capital and loot a burning house? Didn't royal sister say that? Risk and opportunity go hand in hand." "That's true." Gong Yimo's face was bitter. "But there are many people in the capital who know me. It's not good for me to go." Gong Dai held her hand and smiled. "Royal sister only needs to stay by my side. If you really want to go out, can't you disguise yourself?" Gong Yimo nodded reluctantly. Looking at Gong Yimo's reluctant expression, Gong Dai's heart ached. How could he not want to stay in Shi province for a few years before going back? No, as long as Gong Yimo was here, he could not go back. However, Gong Yimo's injury last time gave him a sense of crisis. If he did not have power, how could he protect the woman he loved? He could fight for it. No matter, he believed that he would not lose to anyone, as long as she was always by his side. That warm and sweet feeling swelled in Gong Dai's heart, but there was also some bitterness in it that made him feel helpless. Gong Dai's troops were temporarily left in Shi province, so there were not many carriages and horses. However, there were 1,000 imperial guards escorting them. Gong Dai and Gong Yimo sat in the same carriage. It was covered with thick cushions and was very soft. Even so, it was unavoidable for the carriage to be bumpy. Gong Yimo lifted the curtain and looked gloomily at the bumpy road. She felt the unusual vibration of the wooden wheels and thought indignantly that one day, she would change all of this. After 2 days of travel, Gong Dai's birthday arrived. Gong Dai did not know what happened that day. He only knew that Gong Yimo said that she wanted to get off the carriage to go sightseeing. It was clearly a rushed trip, but he pushed it back. Gong Yimo felt that it was very strange that the accompanying officials were so obedient to Gong Dai. However, this thought was only for a moment before she threw it to the back of her mind. They entered Huzhou City and were very lucky. As it was almost the new year, the streets were bustling with activity. Huzhou City is a desolate place, but there are so many people here. From the looks of it, they are doing well. It seems that the local governor is very capable. Gong Yimo nodded, and then pulled Gong Dai along as she ran along the streets. Gong Dai did not know what she wanted to do. He kept a careful eye on her, afraid that she would be bumped into by others. She seemed to want to buy something. She picked and picked along the way, but she was not satisfied with anything. There was nothing on the streets that caught her eye. She thought for a while and bought 2 sticks of candied haws. She pulled Gong Dai to the only river in the city and sat by the river to rest. This river was called Yuer Bay. It was the source of life for Huzhou City. It was located in the west, and it was dry and lacked water. Therefore, people treasured this river. Every year during the new year, they would come here to light river lanterns to worship the river god. The sky gradually darkened. Looking at the lights on both sides of the river, the lively crowd, and the 2s and 3s of river lanterns in the lake, Gong Yimo only felt relaxed. Then, she passed a stick of candied haws to Gong Dai. Gong Dai was not a picky eater. Moreover, he liked sweets. Therefore, every time she bought sweets, she would not forget to give Gong Dai a portion. Gong Dai smiled but did not say anything. Gong Dai, after today, you will be 13. When Gong Dai heard this, he was slightly stunned. Actually, he had a good memory. How could he not remember his own birthday? He just did not care. However, he did not expect that Gong Yimo would insist on stopping her schedule to come out just to celebrate his birthday. If Gong Dai knew about this beforehand, he definitely would not have agreed to it. Therefore, Gong Yimo's action of acting first and asking later made him feel a different kind of warmth in his heart. Since he was young, Gong Yimo would always come up with something new on his birthday. Whether it was making exquisite pastries, a book that she had copied down that he had never read before, or taking him out at night to steal things and play pranks, she would always spare no effort to make him happy on that day. Then, she would force him to make a wish. As expected, after Gong Yimo said that sentence, she continued, "This year, there are no candles or birthday cakes. We are not particular people. Just make a wish to the river god. It will definitely come true." Gong Dai found it funny. Every time he made a wish, she would ask him to put his hands together and close his eyes. He felt that this was wrong and very childish, but he still did as he was told. Looking at the lanterns in the lake, his expression was gentle. He closed his eyes and made a wish. However, what Gong Yimo did not know was that ever since Gong Yimo appeared, his wish was the same every year. There was only one wish. If there is a God in heaven who listens to my prayers, I, Gong Dai, only wish that Gong Yimo alone can be with me forever. Before he could finish making his wish, Gong Yimo hung something cold around his neck. Her warm breath blew into Gong Dai's ear, making him tremble as if he had been electrocuted. When he turned his head, he saw her smiling face that was so close to him. It was so beautiful that he wanted to swallow it whole. His Adam's apple bobbed. "This is," Gong Yimo giggled and said, "I looked for a long time and couldn't find anything suitable for you. This is the only thing that's not bad." It was a small compass. It was round, exquisite, and beautiful. It was actually an ornament. "Do you like it?" This was one of the few things she had in stock. Gong Dai listened to her and smiled. "Even if royal sister gave me a leaf, I would treasure it. Just like this candied hawthorn." He and Gong Che had probably inherited the emperor's dislike of sweets. However, every time, as long as Gong Yimo gave it to him, he would eat it without hesitation. Thus, everyone always thought that he loved sweets. If she loved him, then so be it, because he would become whatever she liked. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.